Evening and welcome to the regularly scheduled Shelburne Selectboard meeting of May 22nd, 2018, which I can now call to order. We are expecting two of our colleagues who've been delayed just briefly, and Josh, as you've heard, is on the phone tonight. The first order of business is to consider approving the agenda, for which I have a change, and that is to strike item 8, the subject of which CBC member appointment policy will be brought up on the June 12th board meeting instead of tonight. And with that change,
no further.
there are no, I was just quickly saying, we do have a quorum, because we have Josh.
No further changes on my end.
There are no further changes, and therefore, is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve the Shelburne Select Board meeting agenda for May 22nd, 2018 as amended.
Second.
Seconded by Josh. Is there any discussion in the public? And is there further discussion on the board? Hearing none, will those approving please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. And let the minutes show that both Colleen and Mary have not yet arrived. The next item is to consider approving the Select Board meeting minutes of May 8, 2018. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Sure, second.
Seconded by Josh, and discussion. Any discussion in the public? Any discussion on the parts of the board members?
No, they looked accurate to me when I reviewed.
They look fine to me. Hearing none, those who approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and again, Colleen and Mary are not voting for reason of not being present. The next item is public comments. Hearing none. Thank you. The next item is Select Board comments. I'll lead off by calling to your attention that the Colleen Haig Award is going to be presented a week from Saturday, that is June 2nd, a week from this coming Saturday, at the Palmer Sugar House on the Heinsberg Road from 2 to 4 o'clock. That is, the Colleen Haig Award will be presented to former Police Chief Jim Warden a week from Saturday, June 2nd, at 2 o'clock at the Palmer Sugar House, and of course, everybody's more than invited and will be welcome. Are there other comments from the Select Board? Mary is arriving just in time.
Welcome.
Is this me here?
Wherever you'd like to be that's
Yes,
comfortable for you.
you'd have trouble with that because, no, that's Josh.
Sorry, everybody.
There you go. Josh, any comments?
No, none for me this week.
No comments.
None? And Colleen is on her way. Any discussion from the public? Hearing none. The next item is the town manager report.
Thank you. I'll be brief on this. I'd like to thank all the staff, especially Peter, for helping to document damages from the May 4 storm and get cost estimates to FEMA in a timely manner. They came on very short notice, and everyone jumped right into it. JJ helped with that, and many others, and it's very helpful and important in case we reach the threshold for a disaster declaration where we can apply for significant reimbursement of costs. We are moving forward on a whole host of issues and projects, some old, some new. The chair and I have a list of things we're working on, not the least of which is the Spear Street, South Burlington agreement on water capacity issues, and we're working toward a resolution on those. And I'm very happy to announce that today I received notice that we were awarded the VLCT PASIF grant for the LED warning lights for the firehouse. And what those will do is give us a very clear warning that the door is fully open before the trucks depart the station. It's especially important with the Quint, which has a fairly tight clearance on the rooftop. So we were awarded that grant. We can move forward with that project as soon as possible.
Great, that's good news.
Yep, they give us the full amount that we requested, so good to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments in the public? Any comments on the parts of us? No. Next item of business is an update on the E911 call taking dispatch issue, and for which the executive director of the Vermont E911 board is present
Yes, she is.
among a great number of our good evening. Welcome, and thank you very much
My spot.
for making the effort to come. We're very
Thanks for
appreciative.
coming.
You are most welcome, most welcome. I have just a few kind of introductory comments for you, and then I'm happy to answer questions if I can, and if I can't, I'll make a note and get back to you. So for the record, I'm Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the 911 Board. I do want to thank you for inviting me here, thank Lee for inviting me here. I hope to give you some information to make sure everybody's on the same page with where the 911 Board stands in relation to the Chittenden Regional Dispatch Consolidation Project. First thing I want to say is that no decision has been made by the board about closing any public safety answering point. As you're probably aware, there are 6 such public safety answering points around the state, one of which is right here in Shelburne. When the board met on April 18th, Chief Stephen Locke from the Burlington Fire Department, who is also a 911 board member, advised the 911 board that the Chittenden Regional Public Safety Authority was formally requesting approval from the 911 board for designation as a public safety answering point. Once the Regional Dispatch Center is operational and ready to accept that responsibility. So after some discussion by the 911 board members, a motion was made, and I'm going to read right from the minutes so there's no confusion. A motion was made and the board voted to authorize reassigning existing call-taking seats, we estimate that will be about 4 seats, to the Chittenden Regional Dispatch Center once operational. So no decision was made then or has been made since about where those call-taking seats will come from. There are 26 call-taking seats throughout those 6 public safety answering points. The board will need to consider a number of factors in making its determination of where those seats might come from. So, and those, some of the factors that are involved is the call volume that will be impacted, which towns actually do, in fact, go to the Chittenden Regional Center and their associated call volume, what number of seats is needed to support that, and so on. And then maybe even the broader issue that they will need to consider is the statewide operational impact of moving those seats and how it's going to really impact the end user, which is the 911 caller, who is our utmost priority. Timelines that I'm aware of are estimated currently to be 18 to 24 months before the Chittenden Center would be operational. And remember again that the decision to reassign call-taking seats is dependent upon them being operational. So we're looking at an 18 to 24 months period before that happens. Typically, we have been receiving updates on the status of the Chittenden Regional Project at the quarterly board meetings. So that was why we had this update in April, and the next board meeting is scheduled for July 18th. So it's basically at this point a standing agenda item just for an update to see how they're progressing. So that's the timeline we're looking at. 18 to 24 months, so nothing imminent. There's not going to be a decision that comes from the board even in July, though there may be discussion. So, and I'm happy to keep Lee and whoever else would like to be kept informed of those meetings as they come up. So.
Did you want to add anything, Lee, before we ask for
No, thank you.
any comment from,
I have a question.
sure, Tracy?
How many call-taking seats are in Shelburne?
There are 2 call-taking seats in Shelburne.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Got a lot of expertise and experience sitting out there. It must be, got to be some question.
Yes, we do.
You stated that there are 26 seats total right at the moment. How is that determined, and how has that distribution of those 26 seats actually occurred? And if in fact there is this fixed number of seats, the prospect of more 911 centers, if other regions or other counties decide that they are interested in 911 centers, does that mean that that 26 could get subdivided, and how does that process take place in determination of how those seats are assigned?
Right, so where the call-taking seats are or would be reassigned to, I guess where the seats would be reassigned to will be determined by call volume. So how many seats are needed to answer the anticipated call volume? And the reason I kind of hesitated on my response there was right now there are 9 call-taking seats at the Williston Public Safety Answering Point. There are 7 at the Westminster Public Safety Answering Point, 2 here in Shelburne, 2 in Hartford, and then there are 2 each in Lamoille County and St. Albans City Police Department. And those last 2 PSAPs also have 2 or 1 each unfunded positions in their locations. So that's the reason why I can't say that the original distribution of seats is based entirely on call volume, because Williston would not have 9 for the call volume that they handle. Williston traditionally, 911 has been in Vermont. Actually, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. And Williston traditionally has been sort of the backup or the PSAP of last resort over those years. Now we're in a situation where each PSAP serves as backup to the other 5. So rather than overflow calls rolling to just one facility in Williston, they'll roll to all 5 depending on what call volume is going on at that particular moment. So the question of, I think part of the question was, how would, if more regional centers came on board, how would the positions be redistributed? And so that would be a decision that the board would have to make at the time. There is a national trend to fewer PSAPs rather than more. So while it is ultimately a board decision, I think I could say that the thought process would be to not add more and more public safety answering points. And so there would be a limit to where the number of actual seats could be redistributed to. So all of the things that are going to go into the decision-making about where to relocate or reassign call-taking seats for the Chittenden Regional Center would come into play in future decisions as well. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think pretty well. I mean,
Okay.
I think the other question along with that is there a possibility that no seats would be assigned to the Chittenden County Center?
Well, the board decided at its April meeting to designate Chittenden Regional as a PSAP once it's operational and ready to accept that responsibility. So things need to happen.
You also said that no decision had been made.
Right. No decision has been made about where the call-taking seats for Chittenden Regional will come from.
Okay. All right. And one other I guess, sort of administrative question in all of this is, now these seats are all assigned, but the dispatchers themselves are hired by the center, the dispatch centers, is that not by the 911 board?
That's correct. So we have partnerships with all 4 regional public safety answering points, and then with the Department of Public Safety for the 2 public safety answering points that they host, if you will. There's a formal agreement in place with all of those agencies on how many positions they have, kind of the rules by which everyone will play in that relationship, and that sort of, and the PSEP reimbursement as well is part of that agreement.
So can you imagine that essentially if Shelburne has 2 seats, could both those seats be taken away from Shelburne?
That's going to be a decision for the board to make once it has all the information that it needs, including whether the Chittenden Regional Center is operational and ready to accept that responsibility. I can't say that it's not a possibility. I can say, though, that no decision has been made. And there are other places where call-taking seats could come from, including the Williston Public Safety Answering Point.
But as you said in your opening remarks, it would be based on call volume. And so how specifically would that relate to the decision-making regarding movement of seats, since currently Shelburne, covers some of the area that might be covered by the regional center, but it also covers other areas. And so if seats are moved out of Shelburne, then that leaves other areas which, how would they be covered?
Well, call volume is one of the things that the board would have to consider. It's not based on call volume in its entirety. The call volume will determine, though, how many positions Chittenden Regional will need. Where those will come from is there's going to be other factors involved. So if all of the towns that I'm aware of that are currently interested in partnering in this Chittenden Regional Center, they have a combined 911 call volume of about 41,000 in a year's time. Essex right now, to my understanding, is not involved or has not committed. If they were to commit, that would bring the call volume up to 45,000. All of those calls are currently answered at the Williston Public Safety Answering Point. All of those 911 calls are answered at the Williston Public Safety Answering Point and then transferred to the appropriate dispatch agency. So if Chittenden Regional became its own facility and began answering 911 calls for all of these towns, and I should add, these are a lot of ifs, right? Because we don't know exactly what the final makeup will be. But that would reduce the call volume at Williston and plunk it into the Chittenden Regional Center. So that's a factor as well.
Okay. And I guess one last question, comment as well, is that one of my concerns about this originally was since we're talking about the dispatcher's position, my understanding in the development of the regional system, that a large majority of the dispatchers themselves were not in favor of that regional plan. And it seems to me, I'm just wondering, since there is a potential for dispatchers to be moved around, how do you intend on asking, or at least integrating, the operational dispatcher perspective on this whole, I'm not sure how the 911 board makes, from what I understand, this has been a fairly top-down decision-making process, but from a dispatcher perspective, I think they have a lot to offer with regard to how these things are best accomplished, and I wonder how their input is factored into any of this decision.
Right. Well, I certainly don't disagree with the importance of dispatcher input, call taker input in these discussions at all, but I do need to make a bit of a distinction here. So I am with the 911 board, and our purview is over 911 call taking only. So while we partner with the various agencies I mentioned earlier for the provision of call taking services, we do not have any purview over those agencies, including the Shelburne Police Department, on dispatch functionality or hiring decisions, and so on. Once a decision is made to hire in a public safety answering point, that trainee will have to go through a board-approved 911 call taker certification course, which covers what the 911 board has purview over, which is just that piece of that first piece of the 911 call, determining the nature and location and connecting that caller to the appropriate responders. In some cases, the call taker is the dispatcher, so they basically take off their call taking hat, put on their dispatch hat, and send the responder. The board has purview only up to the point where that connection to dispatch is made. So I can't speak to the dispatch side of the house, quite frankly, and how that is managed or operated. But certainly people who sit in those seats would have valuable input in any discussion.
Right, and I assume that the 911 board is responsible for the training of the 911 call takers.
We are responsible for the training of a 911 call taker for the 911 portion of the call. So we do not train how to dispatch a call, how many responders, or what responders to send. Their 911 call takers are trained on how to identify which service is needed. Nor do we teach radio techniques or handling responders in the field and coordinating response agencies.
But I think the whole idea of either moving or training new 911 people also may factor into all of this. How is the most efficient way of accomplishing excellent 911 service?
Certainly. So if and when the Chittenden Regional Dispatch Center becomes a 911 public safety answering point, all of those communications professionals will go through the 911 call taker certification training program. They will be taught the call handling standards and requirements for the state of Vermont, and will be held to the continuing education requirements, the recertification requirements, and so on that are associated with being a 911 call taker in a 911 in a public safety answering point. But again, that the dispatch training is left to the dispatch authority, which in that case would be the Chittenden Regional Public Safety Authority.
Josh?
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Josh. Are there other questions?
I thought I maybe wanted to step in and just clarify what Barb was saying, because she was making some good points.
Would
Sure.
you mind terribly coming to the mic?
No, that's fine. I'm Tricia Vincent, supervisor down at the PSAP. Barb was making some great points that we wear two hats, and that's what I think a lot of people are getting confused in this, is that when they read the article, it said we're losing two dispatch positions. if for some reason we lost our 911 portion, we're not losing 2 dispatch positions. We're losing the components of 911 from our PSAP center. And we would lose that extra funding. The funding, if Peter could help me out, is approximately what, a year right now? What? A year, that's a quarter. Per position. So it's about 70.
Your annual PSAP reimbursement from 911 is about 76,000.
Yeah, I was going to say 75.
Right now.
So we would lose that revenue, which right now offsets our operating costs and allows us to have our 8 full-time people. So really, if you think about a person or our employees, that's about 1 employee, give or take. So our decision as a town or a PSAP at that point, if we were to lose that funding, is do we eliminate a position, or do we go try to find other revenue, or do we change our billing perspective of how we're doing it, which would affect probably why we have such a big house here right now, which would affect our customers. So that will be the big questions that will have to come if for some reason this does go to fruition. So it doesn't shut down our PSAP. It doesn't take away 2 employees. Our employees are Shelburne Police Department, Shelburne Town employees. They, like Barb said, they have nothing.
Right,
to do with
and
that
that's a really
portion.
good point, that maybe I didn't make that distinction clear enough. You can stay right here, because
Okay.
you fill this in very well. So if, big if,
Right.
the board decided that Shelburne was not going to be a 911 PSAP anymore, the 911 call-taking equipment
Right.
would move, but your dispatch operation would or could, it has nothing to do with what the board says. The decision about what to do with the
Yeah.
dispatch operation itself is still with Shelburne. It would just be that 911 component that changed. So that really does
Yeah,
kind of
that's the
fill in
big
the whole
difference. Yeah.
picture here.
Yes.
So.
Thank you. Are there, sir?
Couple questions for Barb is, are there any seats currently not being utilized for the 911? Number 1.
Well, there are extra seats in all PSAPs, really, depending on call volume. I mean, it's not very often that they're all completely in use.
Okay. And the
yeah.
second question is,
Excuse me, would you let our audience know?
oh, I'm sorry, Craig Worcester, Shelburne resident.
Thanks, Craig.
And actually, Barb taught me a long time ago too.
I used to train, so.
And the second question was, the rollover piece, so will that skew the call volume for the numbers as the board considers this type of thing? Because as you stated earlier, a lot of the calls are rolled over for whatever reason, we're busy and stuff. And I know Shelburne takes a lot of those calls as well. So I was just curious if that will play into it.
Well, I think that would probably be part of the discussion as well. And the way calls roll over is also part of that agreement that I was talking about between the board and all of the 911 PSAPs. There's a performance measure in there so that the PSAP is expected to answer 90% of the calls from its primary catchment area. And if they don't answer one of those calls, of course, it's rolling out, right? So calls roll out and calls roll in. I think that that would all be part of the call volume discussion as well.
And the last comment I have basically is what, to kind of expand on what Trish says, is that what the Regional Dispatch Center is trying to do is what we currently do, is that we're basically a one-stage center for Shelburne and where we answer 911 calls, is that they take the call for us and we dispatch out, or they dispatch out, our fire and EMS and our mutual aid partners. So to lose those seats will be a significant difference in how we operate. We'll actually go, in my opinion, backwards. So I just want to make that statement. So, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Craig. Are there any, Chief? Chief Jerry, Linda, anybody? Sir?
I'm Dean Gilmore from the Haven Fire Department. I also represent Addison County on Vermont State Firefighters Association, and I wonder who's representing the fire service on your board right now?
That's Chief Stephen Locke.
So I'm to assume that he has recused himself as far as any discussion, because Vermont State Firefighters Association has had no information given to them about what's going on here.
Okay. I don't know about all discussion, but I do know that he recused himself from that vote to support the Chittenden Regional Center becoming part of becoming a PSAP at the most recent meeting. And let me look into ways that perhaps we can get information
We
to.
had a member that was there, and the former governor didn't reappoint him, appointed Steve Locke as a replacement.
Okay.
Without coming to the VSFA to start with.
Okay,
So
okay.
I think there's a conflict of interest there to have somebody represent us that doesn't even bring us the information, and he's after something for himself.
I'll make a note of your concern.
Thank you.
Any comments? Linda, anybody? Any further comments? And from guests? We thank, sir.
Chief St. George, Schlot Fire Department. When you're evaluating the PSAP seats, since there are so many extra in Williston, would you be evaluating, since Shelburne dispatches a underutilized area in Addison County and Shelburne, that this regional PSAP center wouldn't be able to hit us with radio coverage without multiple links? Would you be evaluating adding to Shelburne's capability?
For dispatch equipment, that's
or
something,
PSAP?
that, the dispatch end of it is something that I can't really speak to.
No, I'm talking about seats for their center. Some of these seats that you're moving around, you say you have excess seats in Williston, and four seats are possibly going to this dispatch center that's not going to be able to serve this underutilized area. Would any of those seats be added to Shelburne and paid to Shelburne to help them service the rest of the state besides two big cities? And
I see, to support, well, it would depend, the call volume at the Shelburne PSAP would need to increase to a level to support additional call-taking seats. So I guess I can't answer that without there being other changes in Shelburne's 911 call catchment area.
So I'm confused.
Yeah.
So when you say that Shelburne is underutilized, do you mean that that Shelburne doesn't get the calls, or that we get more calls than other areas? What do you mean by underutilized?
No, ma'am. Shelburne serves an area that basically cannot be served by this new dispatch center where it's going to be located without millions of dollars of links and radio equipment, and to reach New Haven, Bristol, Lincoln, Shalott, Grand Isle, and these are all things that were purchased when the federal government was giving out grant money, and now all these departments are going to get into a position that we lose our dispatch center if Shelburne's unable to keep it, moving it forward to a regional center, which is going to benefit Burlington, South Burlington, and a few other places, and we're just not going to have the millions of dollars to upgrade our systems to tie into that center. And plus, I don't believe the service for that from that center is going to serve these small departments. We were banged out yesterday by one of your dispatchers for a fire with possible multiple exposures, multiple buildings, possibly multiple patients. Your dispatchers were excellent. They had everything on the road that we wanted before we even asked for it. So I'm just here to support your center and what they do for everyone around here.
Thank you, Chief.
That was going to be my question. I don't really understand what will happen to the service that is needed in some of these outlying towns that Shelburne serves. Does Shelburne serve those towns as a function of the 911 board?
What Shelburne does for the 911 board in the towns in its coverage area, and I can leave some of these maps on the table perhaps when I go, but you're the dark blue. Shelburne PSAP answers 911 calls from callers in these towns. And that is what Shelburne does for the 911 board. Then, because of the way the PSAP is structured and who you serve as dispatchers, a dispatch agency for, you also dispatch for the majority or all of these towns. So
That's not within your purview.
the 911 call taking is,
But
the
the
dispatching
dispatching
is not.
And so when you come in, if we lose 2 seats or a seat, and you come in and remove equipment, will that disable the dispatch capacity
No.
of the town in any way?
It will not. It will remove the 911 call-taking equipment, which is a separate computer, 2 computer screens, a call handling screen and a mapping screen. And the call handling screen has phone capability. And the only calls that come in on that equipment are 911 calls.
And so if you were to take a couple of chairs away, or one, what would happen, as far as you're concerned, as the 911 board, to 911 calls coming from St. George and New Haven and Grand Isle?
If Shelburne PSAP did not have the 911 call-taking positions, 911 calls from those areas would go to another public safety answering point. So it would be one of the other existing public safety answering points.
Or the Chittenden Regional?
It could be the Chittenden Regional, it could be Williston, we can direct the calls anywhere.
Don't many of those calls already go to other, because our catchment area is smaller than the area that we contract for dispatching services.
That could be, you answer about 6.4% of the statewide 911 call volume. In comparison, the towns that are considering being in this Chittenden Regional group answer about 41,000, 45,000 if Essex joins. So that would be, we have about 200,000 calls each year statewide. So what's that, about 25%? Yes, if I've done my math.
I wanted to clarify for you, Mary, a little bit. It
You
would
wanna
help out.
Let the audience know who you are.
Oh, I did already once. It's Tricia.
Yeah, but you have to keep
Sorry.
doing it, unfortunately.
Tricia again. So helping out with the operational aspect of the side of your question is, like Barb said, it would change how we operate. So we would no longer be answering the 911 call directly and being able to question that caller and then immediately turn around and dispatch. That would be the big difference. That's what we do now for the majority of our calls. Is I'm the person answering the call, asking all the questions, and then turning around and dispatching these guys and giving them the information. So that we would become a 2-stage piece, or be the recipients of a 2-stage call. So they would be answered elsewhere and then they would transfer it to us. So we could still operate that way. It would just be an operational change, and we feel that it would lack or bring our service down possibly, because now we have that connection where we are handling the call, know exactly what's going on, and can give that information to our responders. So that would be the
Right,
change.
it's the grapevine problem,
Right,
correct? You
yeah.
lose a little in the
Yeah,
grapevine.
exactly.
But how do you address the gentleman who raised the issue of loss of equipment and
So that is a dispatch aspect, like Barb said. And what he's saying is, if we lose our funding, so we lose, part of the funding that we have, and for some reason we do end up closing down, these responders would have to find another dispatch center. Their choices would possibly be the regional place up here or somewhere else. It would cost everyone money to upgrade their systems to be able to interact with wherever they have to go.
that's the piece I don't get.
Chief, I'm going to let John go ahead. He hasn't spoken yet.
John Goodrich, Deputy Chief, Shelburne Fire. I was just going to touch a little bit on what Trish said. From the receiving end of an organization I work for that is not a PSAP for their dispatch centers. So South Burlington is currently not a PSAP. They take their calls from 911 calls, go to Williston, VSP, get transferred to South Burlington Dispatch. The fire department gets dispatched out. When the fire department has questions or needs further information, the dispatcher may not have had a chance to ask those or doesn't know the questions. So then they don't have the answer. They have to call back VSP Williston. They have to maybe make a phone call back to the caller, or they still have them online, and we go back and forth, and there are minutes in delays versus downstairs. They still have them on the line. They already know the questions because they've worked with the rest of us for so long, and they know what we want for information. They ask it before they even push the tones. We have those answers, and it's very efficient time-wise. So that's one of the benefits of keeping the PSAP here, if that's a possibility, as the board's decision.
Thank you, John. Chief?
Basically, John touched on it. I was going to ask Tricia how much this could possibly delay dispatch. I know that Chittenden, they were selling how much time they were going to save, but that's for other communities. Now, if the PSAP goes away here, we lose the time they saved. Plus, the dispatcher, again, as John said, does not have all the answers. Yesterday, I asked a question, and the dispatcher had my answer before I could finish asking the question. She knows what we're going to ask. It's the service that you get here, and that's why we're such strong supporters of your police department and your dispatch center.
I can give you some data on that. So we ran some numbers to find how long does it take for a 911 call taker to transfer a call to the appropriate dispatch agency. The statewide average is 57 seconds. Now, if the call were answered in Shelburne, it might take Tricia 57 seconds to gather that same information and then hit the button to dispatch responders. But what happens if it's a two-stage call is the call taker will need to transfer it into, let's say, Tricia on a 7-digit line and relay the information. That's the time that is different, is the amount of time that it takes for the call taker to relay the information to the dispatcher. Now that's oversimplifying, the whole idea of having the caller on the line. Dispatchers can stay on the line with a 911 call taker if they wish. They can tell the 911 call taker to disconnect from the call, and they'll take over the call. There's lots of operational things that can go on to improve that. But the bottom line, time to transfer is statewide 57 seconds.
Are there any other questions? Josh, do you want to?
No, I'm fine, thanks. I think all I can say in summary is I think the whole concept and impacts on Shelburne will have to be very seriously considered in any of this decision-making process. And I think looking at the big picture is certainly worthwhile, both for the densely populated areas and for the rural areas.
Are there any other comments from Chief?
Jerry Weemet, Chief of Shelburne Fire Department. I kind of like to express my concern, and I think it's the same as Chief St. George's. We have, in my opinion, probably the best dispatch center in the state of Vermont. They're very confident, they're very comfortable in what they do, and they do a great job for all of us. And I think the biggest concern I have, and as probably most of the departments that are here have, is we have mutual aid arrangements set up with all these departments around us. If something happens, Trish and her crew know exactly who to send, how many to send, where to send them, and that's all taken care of so quickly. My concern is that if we go to the Chittenden County Regional Dispatch, the time lapse, and it's not a lot, I understand, but the time lapse from getting to there to here and then getting the agencies out here we need, because we all have, I'm not saying every department here has a run agreement like we have with dispatch, but most every department in their call list have a setting of what to tone out for first alarm, second alarm, third alarm. And that will get lost in the big scope of things coming from a different dispatch center. It'll delay responses, like Dickie said, and it'll make us spend more time on the radio requesting stuff that we need as opposed to automatically having it come. So that's my biggest concern of losing our own dispatch.
Are those considerations that are taken into account by the regional board as they're looking at the various moving pieces?
The impact
decision-making,
on
or-
911 callers, is definitely taken into account. The board has been on record, in fact, of supporting the concept of regional dispatch centers, like you have here in
Right.
Shelburne. You're a regional center as well.
On a contract model basis, right?
Right. So yes, those things are considered. And what will be the impact of changes on how many people, how many callers, and so on. And so well,
And
there may
board
be other
meets-
comments, but
board
then I
meets
have
quarterly, is that accurate?
Quarterly.
The regional board? Okay.
quarterly, next meeting's in July.
Is it possible for people to attend the meeting like they've attended here this evening?
Absolutely. Yeah, it'd probably be good for me to know if there were 20 or so people coming. I'll get a bigger room. But yes, absolutely. They're open to the public. I will keep, Lee, I assume, would be the appropriate person to keep informed
Yeah.
on those. I have made notes, sometimes in pen, sometimes mental notes, of the comments and concerns here tonight, and I will get them back to the board. And we do certainly encourage you and look forward to hearing more of your input, good, bad, or otherwise, as this moves forward.
Sorry to interrupt, Barb.
That's okay.
Does the board, the 9/11 board, ultimately deliver a recommendation to the Chittenden Regional Dispatch Board, or how does the,
The 911.
when you talked about the 18 to 24 month time horizon?
Right. So the 911 boards made the decision to authorize them becoming a PSAP once they're operational and ready to accept that
Got it. So
responsibility. So then
no further decisions, right? The next condition
the next decisions
is
would be
once they're operational.
Right. Where are the positions coming from,
Okay.
and how is it going to actually unfold? And those would be decisions made by the board.
By the 911
By the
board.
911 board, yes, correct.
Okay.
So,
Would you like to add a comment?
Yeah, so, hi, Charlie Baker, I'm the Executive Director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. So all the towns of Chittenden County are on my board, members. So I work for all of you, but I just want to kind of just make sure you're aware of a couple things. One is that you can follow the progress of the Chittenden County Public Safety Authority on our website. There's a web page, and so it's a public body now. So the agendas and minutes are all posted there. You can follow that. And I guess I want to push a little bit further and say I encourage maybe Shelburne to maybe have somebody attend those meetings. They're meeting about monthly now, just because I think you do have a particular interest in what they do and the impacts on Shelburne. And, of course, from my view, I'm hoping this all works out together somehow eventually, but, it may take a little while to get there. And let us know if we can help in any way as, to support that. And of course, Lee was a little involved in tracking that, supporting that effort. But, we're doing that, really trying to support all the towns, and obviously not all the towns are in. And, so we have some differences to figure out as we try to get the best system for this area. So happy to answer any questions if you think I might know the answer, but just want to make sure you kind of plug into what that group is doing, because I just don't want you to get caught unawares that they're moving. And frankly, I don't want them to move in a direction that has implications here that they're not considering, because they are, they're very focused on serving their towns right now. But I say Royal, we all want the whole system to work as well as it can.
Thank you, Charlie.
And Charlie, who sits on that board? Is it typically town managers of each town?
Yeah, each of the select boards, it's mostly town managers, but for Burlington, it is the fire department
fire
chief,
chief.
Steve
Okay.
Locke. And in Milton, it's the select board chair sits
Got it.
there on behalf of Milton.
Great. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to ask what your thoughts were about my attending those meetings to listen in and share information as it's
I don't think
developed.
there's any question that we should be very closely monitoring developments, and that may mean participating in the quarterly E911 in some form. If not yourself, then somebody that we could ask to represent us, and surely at the forming regional body. It's obviously very important for us to have a good, clear understanding of the process and signposts along the way. But we're very, very thankful for your willingness to come. And
No problem at all. And Lee has my contact information, and as I said, the board would welcome feedback and input from you, from Lee, from the community members. So just please let us know.
we thank all of you responders who have come, first for what you do, most importantly. Secondly, for coming tonight and sharing your points of view, which are very, very helpful to us. We'll certainly be aware of your interests and ready to respond to further questions you might have. Don't hesitate to ask them. Lee, we have a special talent in terms of his own experience as well as his access, and I think that's probably going to stand us in very good stead. So thank you all for coming, and please don't hesitate to ask further questions as we go along in this process. Thanks.
Yeah.
Josh, is that about 2/3 of the room is emptying out. The next item is to consider the request of the Town Manager Search Committee for financial support, for which you have a background memo that was circulated sometime prior, which in the interests of time, I'm just going to quickly summarize. You also have had a copy of the proposed RFQ. Thanks to Ann's fine work, to Roger, Kathy, Mark, and many other members of the committee. But to help, I think, us with our decisions tonight, what we need to do is approve or not, and if so, issue the RFQ, delegating contractor selection, contract negotiation, and contract administration to the committee as proposed, and that is proposed in its eventual form as a collaboration. To set and approve a not-to-exceed contract cost and authorize expenditure from 2018-2019 funds, to establish a town manager salary range for immediate purposes of advertisement. By immediate, I don't mean tomorrow, but soon enough. And to decide if the town will provide relocation expenses to the successful candidate, if so, in what maximum amount. To provide for contractor services to the Select Board if we so desire in our own review, interview, and town manager selection process, and assistance as well in collaboration with the search committee in negotiating a contract with that selected person. And finally, to respond to what additional actionable committee requests for guidance in the search process and the timetable for such that it may make at the meeting. And with that, would you, Roger, or would you like to present the RFQ and your thoughts?
So I co-chair the search committee with Kathy Brooks, who unfortunately couldn't attend tonight. And I think we have 15 people, 7, how many? It's a large committee.
And you are Roger Price.
I'm Roger Price.
Thank you.
Yeah. Shelburne resident. So, yeah, I'm Roger Price, Shelburne resident. So the RFQ here, which is attached, sort of gives an overview of what we're looking for in the town for a town manager. And on the backside, it's telling the firms that we choose what we'd like them to provide us with. I've had the ability to look at the RFQ process in Essex, of which there were around 8 firms that responded, and they're voluminous documents, 10, 15 pages, that essentially, if I'm not mistaken, you have mirrored the Essex.
Yep.
So a lot of this came from Essex. We have a list of approximately 50 search firms, of which they're nationwide. We have a subset of this committee, this search committee of 4 of us, who would like to select a few search firms, maybe not reinvent the wheel, look at some of the firms that Essex has used and ask them to respond to the RFQ. My understanding is we're obligated to request at least 3 firms, is that correct? Yes. 3 firms. We may use a few more, but certainly not 40 or 50. And I think that's about it.
Thank you, Roger.
And the questions that Jerry's asked are the questions that the committee has brought forward to Jerry, because we can't really do much without knowing your caps on salary ranges, and also if you're prepared to budget, or not budget, but support with the search consultants. Our committee unanimously has said they're not in a position to do this without support from a consulting firm.
No. Are there any reactions?
I support the idea generally. I'm just wondering if we have an idea of how much it would cost to retain such a firm. This information, I apologize, came in recently and I haven't absorbed all of it.
So in reviewing the RFQs, I've spoken to only one firm, the firm that was retained in Essex, and also happened to be the firm that filled the Hanover, Massachusetts position, and its management resources in New Hampshire. And I spoke with the principal there. His fee for the prior searches was $15,000 for a full search. And they're more than happy to, you can do just the front end where they'll help you with a job description, advertising, you can do they'll bring you 10 or 15 applicants and then let the committee follow that through, or they'll go to this final selection process and extensive background checks. The other 4 or 5 RFQs that I looked at before coming here tonight ranged from $15,000 to $50,000. So I think that, generally, for my 40 years in this field, $15,000 on a salary at this level is very reasonable. Also, there is some firms offer guarantees and some don't. So the one firm I checked with, they offer a 1-year guarantee, which is fairly unusual.
And what would the guarantee do?
They would replace the person if they leave in the first year.
Thank you.
At no additional fees.
And are you comfortable with that as someone who's co-chair and also has experience in the field?
With what?
A $15,000 contract for
I think it's very modest, and I think that we will not have many options other than a few firms at that level.
Thank you.
So.
Would you be more comfortable with 20?
Sure. I don't want to say who, because I don't know who's going to be selected, and I think we should look carefully. If we choose the same firm that Essex used, and I liked Alan Gould very much, if he happens to rise, it's not going to cost the town 20. But if we want to consider other firms, it very well may cost. I think you can get it done for 20. And the other thing is, as you know, in your document, if we're restricted from bringing people from outside this area, or we're not going to consider, so it's going to cost the town a fair bit of money to do this search, including relocation, and if there is relocation.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Mr.
So
Chair.
one more thing.
Of course.
There's also expenses associated with this. If we're flying people in from the West Coast, that's not included in the $15,000. So there are going to be expenses. And I saw on one of these RFQs, expenses ran almost as high as $10,000. So that will be determined in how we proceed as a committee and where we're going to look.
There are also expenses for the firm, right? If they're coming up from wherever they may be, right? New York or Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Right.
And fortunately, due to Skype and many other technological advances,
We manage
hopefully
that.
can minimize their
Agreed.
travel.
Right.
So,
But to
if
your
the-
point-
if the board or the town wants to interview everybody, all the search firms, and people are traveling back and forth, you're correct, there would be significant fees.
Right, hence a strong bias for a Northeast executive recruiting firm, right? So we're not
In my mind, there's no
flying
option
folks
other
in
than
from
that.
California. Okay.
Yeah.
I tend to support the 20 as a number as well, just so that the committee doesn't have to come back here for 3 or 4 extra grand if they're in that range. I'd feel comfortable, and hopefully you can land it at 15.
And so as a committee, you said that you were, is this like getting feedback here? It's really loud. As a committee, you guys decided to, if we approve this, to narrow down the search firms to 3, and then you would present 3 to us? Because I think our original was that you would come up with 3 candidates for the actual position.
Am I incorrect? We are going to recommend, after we've gone through the process, a search firm to utilize.
Okay.
We will bid it out to, we have to, at least 3.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we might choose to do 5. I don't feel like it's appropriate to read 15 RFQs.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we're in the early stages. There are no candidates yet. Once the candidates are developed, and part of the decision, and our committee did say, we do not want to do part of the search. We don't want a search firm to do part of the search. We want them to do the front end, interviewing, working with us, and working with the board to bring finalists here. So there's a fair bit of, this is not a partial search.
So the search committee's partnering with the executive search firm, right, to vet as a first step before we see candidates?
Correct.
Okay.
It's what we did in the prior search, too.
Right.
It just was, I mean, I was not as, I had no idea who picked Vermont League of Cities and Towns. But that's who
Understood.
provided us applicants, and we did all the work of interviewing and reviewing countless resumes. One of the things that this search firm is going to do is they're going to develop a position profile, competencies, and so forth with stakeholders. So whether that's the board or some people in the town, and then they will utilize their resources to bring forward a number of applicants. They'd like to narrow it down to 15, of which we would select 5 potential people to bring here to interview. Then from that, we would pick a candidate or potentially 2 to decide. The other thing is that they will do initially background checks, but they're not as extensive as they will do with the finalists. And if we chose not to do the full search where they do it till the very end, they in fact charge $1,500 to do a full background check. It's a very extensive. So, and they're not willing to guarantee their work if that's not done. And I'm sure that's true with many firms.
There's a distinction here that when the committee has identified finalists to us, we've entered language here that gives the board, us, an option of making use of these same professional services in our process of reviewing and interviewing and vetting, should we wish to do that. It won't be quite repetitive of the committee process, but we're allowing for the possibility that we may want to make use of some of this same service. To do maybe a little scene setting here, the idea is that the town wishes that the recruiting effort for this new town manager be as widespread and thorough as possible. That we make every use of all media, that we don't confine ourselves either by actual choice or appearance to one small geographic area or even one section of the country. And it's felt in the mission statement, some of you may remember, we provided for the potential of the committee to request services in whole or part to support their effort. This being a little more comprehensive than the prior one, which some of us had an experience with. So that has led to a committee request for full services, which is the bidding document, if you want to call it, that we're discussing right now, that will be sent out to qualified professionals. My sense would be that a $20,000 not to exceed cost seems appropriate. I'm going to suggest a couple of other numbers to get the conversation.
Can I just add one thing, Jerry? Your comment about utilizing the board using the search firm, in my personal opinion, when there are some finalists, it would be essential that not maybe 5 people on the board, but some people on the select board work in tandem and collaboration with the person assigned to the search from whatever search firm is chosen.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense. I mean,
Well, because they report to you in the end anyway.
in terms of the contract, in terms of the choice itself, we have parallel processes or sequential processes here. Meanwhile, I think it's important for us to delegate to the committee the choice and recommendation of a final contractor, in the sense that they know best what they need, and they will know best at that point who potentially could provide it. And that in collaboration with them, when they come back to actual formal approval of a contract, we would have obviously a role. Another point to make, that's a collaboration that I think is representative of this process all the way through. I'm going to suggest that a town manager salary range might be 95 to 105. Do you comment?
My comment? I was told that I think you can fill it in that range, but I don't think you're going to fill it for less than that. I mean, it's expensive to live here, as you know, and I don't. Joe is earning but was at 115, if I'm not mistaken.
108 at the
108.
At the very
so
last.
all that we care about is making sure that we know what is the maximum, not what the minimum is. So how far can the town reach? Because that doesn't mean we're going to pay it, but it's really important to get the best candidate you can find. So.
Jerry, can I give you some numbers anyway?
Yeah, she has a salary.
For comparison.
You want to let the folks know?
So I'm Ann Janda, Director of Administration for the town, and I did a little bit of research on salaries, and towns about the same size of ours are the ones that I looked at in Chittenden County. So in Winooski, the town manager is now making 107, and when Joe left, his salary was up to 110. And Williston, comparable size, I believe is now up to 105. So that gives you some background.
Jan, Ann, do you know how long the town managers in Williston and Winooski have been there? Because if they're in their
that's a very good question.
20th year, that's
so
a different story.
Strangely enough, Rick McGuire has been in Williston over 20 years. And he has the lowest salary, and I did not speak to him about this, but my guess is that he was just getting raises in small increments over time, and it's slowly edging up to where the newer managers like Jessie Baker in Winooski, she started, I think, more like 98, and then just in the last year renegotiated up to 107. And I think, so I think that's kind of the going rate in this area.
Has the committee talked about this at all? Do you have a recommendation on the number, or
question
are you
really
looking
is-
for us to just?
No, the question is, do you want an experienced town manager? Are they going to be local or not? If this job were in the Boston area, it would probably pay 130, 140,000. If you want to hire somebody, we just had when Joe came here, he had a few years' experience in Heinsberg, not a few. So if you're looking for somebody more junior, I think that you're going to find them probably in the $90,000 range. But if you're looking for a seasoned town manager, I would push the range. Did you say 105? I would push it. I think that not that you need to hire them. And the other thing is, I don't know that you're going to get the person locally. And it's really hard to get people from a metropolitan area to move here because the salary structures are so different. And I can't answer the question because I haven't seen any applicants.
What would be a preferable range?
To 120? To Joe's range,
100
115?
to 120?
Whatever Joe was earning.
Yeah.
Joe was at 107?
He's 108, and just that
108.
month went to one, yeah.
Well,
I think given the numbers that have been stated, I think it has been stated that we are looking for a a well-qualified candidate who can meet the needs of Shelburne. I would hesitate to say we need to go for the top of the line if that isn't necessarily required, but I would certainly rely on the committee's discussions to get there. However, given those figures, I would be more comfortable with that 105 figure, given the fact that there probably are will be other costs involved, and so I'm less comfortable with starting at a high, putting the high number, because my experience says that's where it ends up. So I would prefer to be thinking more on the lower end and see where we go from there. But I think this, if this hasn't been discussed thoroughly by the committee, I would certainly like to hear the results of that discussion.
But this range, Roger, just to confirm, is just for purposes of soliciting candidates. We ultimately decide the number. So we could say, hey,
Correct,
it's
and also the marketplace is
one-
going to dictate what you pay.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, we can say, I'd like to think we could find somebody at 80, well, I'm told we have a chief that's making 90, so probably it's not good HR to bring somebody in less than 90. But it would be wonderful if we could find somebody at $95,000. Be great.
But the number doesn't bind us.
Doesn't bind anybody. The only
Right.
thing it's going to do, it's going to let the search firm know what our outside, and it's their job to manage expectations. And, of course, ours and
Well, it's
yours.
going to let a candidate know, too.
Yeah.
Right.
That for sure. That's
And
what-
if you have
that's what
somebody-
that's what they'll go and read first in the ad,
Which?
the salary range.
Well,
So
correct.
even
Well,
if
not
we-
always, Jerry.
Yeah, well, a good
But it
part of
sounds
the
like
time.
the town manager in Williston is probably underpaid comparatively with other Chittenden towns of similar size.
The question that was brought up, which was great, if he's been in the job for how long?
Over 20 years.
It's not relevant. Because after 20, he probably started at 40. And that, so the question is, what would it take to replace that town manager? So you have some salary data for locals. Right.
All right, what's your pleasure, gang? 100 to 115 is the range?
As I said, I'm
Easy, Bill. We're trying to, you want to make a comment?
Well, I mean, I go back to my question, Roger. I mean, has this issue been discussed by the committee?
When you say this issue, are you saying we've done a compensation survey? No.
Yeah, well, I mean, that to me seems like a reasonable way, rather than just sort of taking a dart and throwing it somewhere. I think it would be best to have the data rather than to make a decision on, rather than just to come up with some figures.
Yeah, so Josh, we do have the data. We have the VLCT salary survey, and we did share that information with the committee.
And what was?
And I can share it with you if you like. It looks at all town managers in Vermont
Right.
salaries.
But I'm not sure I've heard what the committee's decision was.
The committee talked about the salary ranges and thought that they were reasonable. I mean, it's documented in the minutes.
I think they're looking to us for a decision, Josh, because among the problems is that there's now 3 weeks until the next board meeting. And without an official decision, they can't place an ad. I'm suspecting that that's a bit of a situation we want to avoid. I respect the point you're making, but I think they've come to us because it's up to us to make the decision. Sorry?
If we retain a search firm, the search firm's going to place it.
I understand, Roger, but my point is, we're 3 weeks away from the next meeting. I'm sure you don't want to wait 3 weeks to get a salary range.
But
So-
why? But to me, we're talking about apples and oranges here, in that if the topic under discussion here is agreeing to start a search for a search firm, which I wholly agree with, then once that search firm is chosen, then they will be doing the advertising. And so I'm not sure why we're even having the discussion about the salary range at this point, because we have to go through the process of getting the search firm, who will then have the discussion about the salary range. So I'm not sure why that's an important part of this decision.
Because
Rather than why can't we just make the decision?
I'm going to offer the point of view, Josh, that the search firm are among the first to want to know what the salary range is.
Right, but how long are we, but if we're talking about making a decision, let's go with the search firm, that process is going to take how long to make that decision?
I'm afraid I lost you.
If we approve tonight,
Correct.
Which I'm in favor of
To issue the RFQ,
right? Then how long is it going to take before we have a search firm on board?
I think the point, Josh, is that the issuance of the RFQ should be accompanied by a sense of salary range that the town of Shelburne anticipates, indicates it's willing to pay. It's not sequential in that sense.
Can we just say
It's part of the same process.
90 to 115 and
Yeah,
gives
that's
us some good latitude?
I was going to say 95%.
Yeah.
The really only relevant number
This is the high end, I
is
get
what's
it.
the max.
Yeah.
And so, of course,
But
we're resident, we should pay as little as we can to we want to get the best qualified person. So to me, the only number in my mind is what our past town manager is making.
Yeah.
And whether it's going to be in that range or not.
it's in that range.
And if you want to say, well, I think you can say 50 to 100. I mean, I don't care what the low end is. And I think that we, as a committee, should have some sense of where the board.
Yeah.
We have time to get there to know our sweet spot. But I think for this, I'd say
And
90 to 115. You good with that?
Yeah.
With the sense that this
Josh?
isn't a final decision, I'm okay with that.
And then, do you need a motion, Chair,
Well, I've
for the 20,000 to retain a search committee?
I'm trying to step my way through, Colleen, through
Okay.
the other questions here, because there's a question of whether we think whether we believe the town should pay relocation expenses, and if so, in what maximum amount. That's another item that's of interest to the committee, and it's dependent on
Jerry, I'm really confused as to why those kinds of decisions have to be made before we have a search firm, which, for my understanding, would provide us information and guidance as to what all that means. I'm not quite sure why we're having those discussions.
The search firm, Josh, is not going to decide for us whether the town pays a relocation expense.
Correct,
That's
I understand that, but I would.
If you'll let me finish, that's our decision, and that's what we're discussing.
Correct, but my understanding is one of the things you get from the search firm is advice and guidance on how that would affect your applicant pool and how and what that is. So to me, that's a discussion you have with the search firm rather than before the fact deciding on let's go get a search firm and then hear what they have to say.
Okay,
I think what I would feel comfortable with is if it's a matter of when you're interviewing search firms and this is a question that they would like to know, then I would say that that's probably negotiable and based on, qualifications, years of experience, the rest of the contract. And my guess is that's going to be stuff that's going to be discussed in executive session with the possible ultimate candidate eventually, right?
And that may be our decision, that it's highly dependent on finalists that we interview and negotiable at that point.
Yeah.
I've heard different people say different things. We want to do a nationwide search. We want to do a local search. In my experience, it's not easy to relocate to Vermont. And I've seen it happen many times where it doesn't work out, where you have one person come and a partner doesn't come, and it's challenging. So the idea of, and I personally, to have a sophisticated and expensive relocation package is absurd. I mean, buying houses but some small amount of relocation assistance, I think, is the only thing that needs to be spoken up front to whatever search firms we're going to talk to. We're open to considering a modest amount of relocation.
That would be great. I think I like that. Well worded.
Thank you
Yep.
for that. Cool.
And I think I had tossed a number out of my own opinion. like maybe $5,000,
Why don't
but,
we leave it at modest?
yeah, but I mean, but it's not, people have houses, they want people,
And just, where are the budget dollars coming from for the 20 and
Well, that's a good question
Peter?
for you.
for me or for Peter?
Well, for collectively,
Okay.
I have
Peter,
not.
can you help us out here?
I mean, short answer, there's no money budgeted specifically for
Right.
that purpose, but at this point, there's some room in terms of the town manager's salary line item. We do have a technical assistance, select board, discretionary fund, 5,000.
Okay.
It's unbudgeted, but
Right.
hopefully there'll be some offsets throughout to offset it.
And it would have to be 201819 monies.
Yes,
It would have to be post-July.
assuming you don't hire somebody between now and
That's
June
fine. We could
30th,
defer the
yeah.
payment, right? I mean, till July.
so I know I'm on camera, but my gut is the job can be filled somewhere around $100,000 with a candidate in New England. And maybe we need to pay more, but I think it's not a bad recruitment tool to spend six figures, and I think that we would love to do it if we can. But if we need to do more, it would be nice to have flexibility, to have the search firm has flexibility. And in terms of advertising, Jerry, it's all the recruitment, if we retain a search firm, they coordinate all of this. We don't do any advertising or any social media. To post on social media that we're trying to fill a job here would not be appropriate. It needs to be coordinated by the search firm.
Good point.
The simple point was, when our job is advertised, it will include a salary range.
Are you asking me?
No, I'm seeking your agreement with that.
It's correct.
Simple.
I would just ask that the committee negotiate this hard. If you have the 20K to work with, make sure we don't get dinged with a lot of fees and extras that are going to surprise us on the back end of this search. That's all.
I'm involved in negotiation.
I know.
But it would be really important to collaborate with the board. So it's not like somebody on the committee or a couple people on the committee are going to do this and it's going to be finalized and you're going to get a contract. We're going to need to collaborate with, whether it be, maybe not all five of you, but a couple of people, so that we present a contract that you're going to say is good and you're prepared to accept it.
You're going to present it to us in negotiable form.
It will be a negotiated contract, but the negotiation should not, in my opinion, would not just be the committee doing it solely without
No, I
any
understand.
collaboration with you.
I understand, yeah. All right, now, to return to Colleen's question, this would be a very long and involved motion. But I don't know any other way to do it other than to just move down these bullets and to propose we move to approve and issue the RFQ as presented, which delegates contractor selection, contract negotiation, and contract administration to the committee as proposed. That we set and approve a not-to-exceed contract cost and authorized expend of $20,000 and authorized expenditure from 2018-2019 funds. That we establish a town manager salary range of 1 to 120. Is that how we've ended?
I think we said
95 to 115.
90 to
90.
115.
95 to 115.
90.
90 to 150.
90 to 115.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. To decide if the town will pay relocation expense, to express our willingness to consider relocation expenses in some modest amount. And to provide for contractor services to the select board if so desired in its review, which we discussed earlier, interview and town manager selection process and in collaboration with the search committee in its negotiation of a contract with that person. There being no other additional actionable requests, that would be the motion as I would propose it.
Second.
Seconded by Mary. Is there any discussion further amongst ourselves? Josh?
No.
Any discussion in the public? Hearing none,
Mr.
those,
Chair, I'd just like to say for the record that I've not been involved in any of these conversations with the committee, drafting the RFQ or any other aspects of this. I just Would
No.
like that to be clear on the record.
And we were
Thank you.
hoping to make that pretty obvious by the fact that we never addressed a question to you or
Indeed.
asked your opinion or even looked at you.
Indeed. Just wanted to be clear with everyone. Thank you.
But for purposes of audio
Appreciate that.
recording, thank you. Those who approve, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We thank especially Roger and Kathy and Mark and of all Ann Janda, as well as several committee members, Linda, who are here, Jane tonight. And we appreciate greatly your effort to this point. I think we're on a great course, and there's a great deal of shared understandings of what we're looking for here, and we look forward to future get-togethers. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is to discuss with the Ethics Committee. A large number of the membership is here, including its chair, Lee Suskin, Tom Little, Mike is here, Bill Deming, Pete Gadju, and Diana has come, and if I've missed somebody,
Micah Shoes here.
Mike, yes, and if so, I'm apologetic. And this is to discuss with the Ethics Committee progress and direction with an updated ordinance. I'll make note of the fact that Mary and Jamie are our appointed liaison to the Ethics Committee. They will certainly have the major role in this discussion to follow. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lee Suskin, Chair of the Ethics Committee. I note that you're here on tonight until at least 10 o'clock, if everything keeps going smoothly as it has, and that's assuming that we finish in 2 minutes. So I'm going to do my presentation short and sweet. I've presented via Lee Crone a memo that gets us to where we are today and the key points. Rather than take 15 minutes to present it, I'll save everyone a lot of time. I'll just say quickly, it talks about thanking Mary and Jamie for joining us last week at our meeting and getting their thoughts on how we should proceed. We identified a number of issues that the committee is not in total agreement on, and that the two members of the select board are not total in agreement on, that we could discuss tonight or we can discuss in the future. And those issues relate to what powers the Ethics Committee should have in addition to just hearing complaints, investigatory powers, powers to issue advisory opinions, powers to encourage mediation, an educational role, whether the committee should establish aspirational guidelines or what some people call core values that everyone who works for the town or volunteers for the town should adhere to, but would not be subject to a complaint. Areas to enhance civility and respect in all those areas, and then the areas that would be clearly prohibited conduct, which would primarily focus on financial conflicts of interest that would be subject to a complaint. Issues related to recusals and standard of proof for proceeding with a complaint, for finding a violation, and issues related to funding. Our plan is, we had hoped that this would all get done by July 1, but to tell you, the more I think about it, that's not going to happen, obviously. But I'd like to proceed. I'm going to ask the committee to have a special meeting in June so we can proceed and hopefully find a time that the select board liaisons can join us. And then there can be more discussions with the select board before we issue our final recommendation. Our current, what we have done is we've taken the current ordinance that was adopted in initially 2009, I think, and then revised in 2015, and we've been redlining it and marking it up. And based on actually comments from our interim town manager and members of the committee, I think it's an unwieldy ordinance. So we're going to start to try to get it more concise, to the point, so all members of the public can understand it, so all public officials can understand it. People know what public officials need to do to act in the interests of the town and to breed public trust and confidence in town government, and the public knows what's expected of them. And I think the bottom line will be a clear, concise ordinance. Everyone's going to just adhere to it, and the committee will have very little to do. And I do hope
It's a
that.
wonderful goal.
And that's the goal. So I went too long already. So any comments from our liaisons or any members of the select board on what you have in front of you?
I just want to let the public and the rest of the board know that it's clear to me this committee has put in so much work and effort into this, and they've already done far more than they signed up to do. And I think they should be congratulated even at this point, although your work isn't finished. I do think it's going to take a little more work to get over the goal line, but you've certainly come quite a far way, and I really applaud you. It makes me really feel glad to have people such as yourselves and everybody else on the committee doing this kind of work. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you, and I will be at the June meeting, assuming no conflicts of interest. That's just a joke. Sorry, couldn't help it.
I would just say I applaud the early outreach on this. I think our goal should be, as a board, to try to minimize this list so that when we get to the point when we have a public hearing, we're only talking about maybe 2 or 3 issues, as opposed to what had been a much longer list than this at one point. So
Yes.
I think we're making good headway just to back up 30,000 foot and keep it in perspective. There's some way to go, but and maybe July 1's aggressive, which but I think we're all going to work in good faith to get this over the finish line and make it as understandable and workable as we can. And I was really happy to see, if you didn't get a chance to read the Vermont Legislative Research work product, it's great. And it just, the ethics committee meeting we attended really just reinforced for me the need to train against this and educate the public. Once we have an ordinance, that's great, but we need to continue to invest resources and our time in making sure that we're making it accessible and workable so that we can diffuse situations earlier when they arise. So with that, I don't know the best way to use our maybe 10 minutes here to walk through this, or Josh, you have any thoughts?
Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I would second. I mean, it's great to see the sort of in the documents we have, sort of the evolution of how this is. I certainly do have some of the questions. Would like to see some of the answers to some of the questions that have been raised. I have some others. Would it be just as? I mean, I think it would take a long time to get a discussion of a lot of these things. Would it be better just to put my questions in writing that could be discussed in the June meeting, or are we expected to have a significant discussion this evening?
That would be very helpful to the committee if you put it in writing.
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to echo the comments about the whole committee that is here. We've got excellent members who have put in a lot of time. We work well together. It's a great group. We've been pretty much the same committee for many years now. Thank Mike Ashew who got the UVM Legislative Research Service to do that excellent report for us that we're going to learn from. And I want to thank them all. And I also want to particularly thank members of the public who have been attending our meetings for the last 6 months routinely, and have major input into this product. And I appreciate their involvement, and many of them are here tonight.
I think we may find as a group that we might have differing opinions on some of these issues, so it may be hard to reconcile some of these big picture issues in the course of 10 minutes, but maybe there are a couple. Are you hoping to use your next draft as a reorganization? Okay, so you have enough to do as it is without direct input on this, but I do think it would be helpful if we could say, hey, what do we think about aspirational content as a general matter? Because that's a conversation that we've had, I think, with across the board at times, and I think we could all perhaps maybe try to get to a decision point on that to at least give some clear direction. And I'll start. I think because the ordinance is so challenging to read at times, and we had 5 lawyers in the room, I think, for that committee meeting, and it's been a challenge, right? Hence the idea to bring an ombudsman and someone to help interpret this ordinance. So for me, less content, the better. I'm not disagreeing with the idea of aspirational content. I think we should all strive for that, but I don't think the ordinance is the place for that to live.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Jamie. I mean, I think aspirational comments or content, where it may set the tenor of the document, it does potentially, at least in the current document, it may offer the thought that those things are actually things that a complaint could be made against, rather than very more specifically talking about prohibitions, because I think everybody will often agree on what aspirational issues are, but I think for the purpose of this ordinance, we have to be a little bit more definitive.
Any others? Thoughts on aspirational content as a general matter?
I agree. I feel like this should be more of like just a town policy, but it has to be more encompassing and include like media policy and a lot more than I think what can be covered here. It'd be huge. And I feel that there's the overall tone of the rest of your memo. It talks about investigatory and subpoena, the power of being able to subpoena and mediation, and that seems more of kind of like a judging type of power, where if you're going to combine that with aspirational guidelines, which while what somebody considers a respectful question, somebody else doesn't. So, trying to nail down what this overall nebulous, what's civil, and I feel like combining that where you're potentially going to be judging somebody on it is going to be difficult to reconcile.
The concept is the current ordinance does not distinguish between disrespectful behavior and a financial conflict of interest. And so the concept of including as core values and clarifying not subject to a complaint is people should be civil to each other. People should be respectful to each other. That's who we are as a town, both as public officials and as the public. And making it clear that's not subject to a violation, that's not subject to an investigation, that's not subject to a subpoena. That's just something, here's who we are. And a whole separate section on someone who serves on the DRB and doesn't tell anyone that their brother-in-law is the developer on a project that they just approved. That's a whole separate thing that may require an investigator, because how's someone going to know, any complainant going to know that that person's the brother-in-law? And it may need some investigation or some other aspects to connect those financial issues that would not otherwise get discovered by a member of the public. And the committee may need to follow up on that. Similar to the way the JCB has an investigator, if necessary, when a judge might be acting inappropriately financially.
In my view, these ethical guidelines, an aspirational code, if you wish, should take the form of a pledge or something external to the ordinance. I just don't see it embodied in the ordinance, if with the difficulty of defining the definition, and B, if it's not something against which a complaint can be made, it's questionable to me as why it's in there. So my greater sense is that the ordinance should reflect the traditional, conventional, call them financial or nepotism type concerns that appear and that were addressed very thoroughly in that VLS piece, which was largely about conventional conflict of interest ordinances. No, that's just a general point of view that in a gross sense, I don't see the two.
My initial reaction is I like that. If the select board would adopt that as a separate document and separate from the ethics ordinance, I would be thrilled.
Every volunteer takes a pledge on what's the the community standard of behavior in these jobs. Yours, ours, any of the 100 of volunteers that serve on our various boards, committees, and commissions.
That would accomplish the same purpose in my mind.
Yeah. And
I don't think anyone disagrees with the spirit of the content. It's just, it's probably not living in the right place here, is my sense.
And maybe we can rely on.
I don't know how the committee, we didn't really get into this during the session, but
I don't know if you want.
I'm not sure there's consensus on the committee for this concept itself either.
Are you planning to talk? Well, let's,
You want to comment, Mike?
do you want me to stand there and comment? I don't want to.
If you would, please.
The cameras want you.
For me, the nice, Mike Ashew, by the way, Ethics Committee member, the nice thing about the VLRS report is it made it possible to think about a lot of different options and ways of conceiving of this, which when we had discussed the investigator and the ombudsman, I wasn't comfortable in reading that. I thought, okay, there's a lot of ways we can do this, and that was kind of liberating. The thing that stuck out for me about that research, though, was that creating a culture of adherence or a culture of commitment to these kinds of values was important. And whether it's in the ordinance or not, I don't think the decisive issue. I think finding a way to, facilitate that attitude. So if it's in the ordinance or not in the ordinance, I think for me, the goal of this rewriting of the ordinance should be to find ways to cultivate that attitude that, everybody's committed to these kinds of principles, and we find ways to facilitate that. So, the other stuff, I'm curious. I didn't mean to take your spot. So anyway, I mean, I really wanted to emphasize the educational component because we asked them, what evidence do you have of effectiveness? And one of the data points they gave us was that the most effective use of these ordinances is to educate people and create this kind of culture, and that seems to have the biggest effect in lowering incidents, lowering complaints. So, as long as we don't lose sight of that the aspirational language is there to facilitate this kind of commitment and create this kind of culture, this attitude that, these are core values that we all kind of adhere to and believe in, and that sort of thing. So.
A couple of years ago, I think we were, many of us who are in this room were at a sort of educational session that was given by Brian Monahan to talk about the ethics rules. I might be conflating two meetings that we had, but there was a meeting when I was on the DRB where we reviewed the ethics rules, and I, for one, think it would be appropriate to do that on an annual basis and ask all members of boards and commissions and committees to attend those, because that was very helpful.
It had been a standing
Gary's
meeting.
brainchild.
Yeah, it had been a standing annual meeting, I think.
Yeah, in which all of the committee members, board members, and in public.
I think it probably should be required. I know that I attended one, but I think I might have said to the second one, nah, I don't need to go. I know that stuff. And so there might have been more than one since I've been around.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible, so probably smart to make it kind of mandatory.
I think it'd be nice to sync up that session once we have a new ordinance, right?
Yeah.
It'd be nice to introduction to the new ordinance. Here's
Yeah.
what's changed, here's the old, here's the new.
Yeah.
Be really nice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Mike. I mean, I think that's a basic point, and what form it takes in the end is a lot less important than the attention we give it, the appropriate attention that it gets, and decisions we make as to how to make that happen. And that's where, to me, some of the most valuable work of the committee is being done. Because you're spending lots of thinking time on those issues, and we're very reliant on where you've come out on some of these. So the committee certainly will be an integral part of any effort, whether it takes the form of pledge or code, or whether it's codified in any way, or whether it takes the form of, constant education or outreach. I mean, whatever form it eventually takes, is going to be greatly indebted to the work of the committee. So,
Yeah, I just hope we don't, that to me is one of the key goals, not to lose sight of, that the data shows that the better we are at doing that, the better we are at lowering incidents and increasing public trust.
Yeah, and the statistical evidence was pretty compelling. I
Yeah,
mean, it was interesting from a variety of locations too. So,
and not to, I don't want to speak for Lee, but I mean, I think we were, curious about guidance on things like the ombudsman or mediating, suggesting mediation, advisory opinions. I'm curious how the board feels about those other.
Yeah, no, we talked about this a little. I like the idea personally. I think it will be helpful to just, again, de-escalate issues. I think it's an opportunity to informally have a conversation with an ethics committee member.
Yeah.
The question for the committee will be, who should that be?
Right.
Is it appropriate to be an ethics committee member, or should it be someone else? Maybe a select board member. Maybe someone completely external. Right? Who has some expertise or comfort with the ordinance to be able to advise.
Yeah.
Jamie, didn't you have the idea that there would be a rotating member of the ethics committee?
Yeah, just a concept to think about.
To take the call type thing?
Yeah.
If it came up. But I do like the idea and concept. I think it would be helpful. I'd be interested in not only how the board feels, but to the extent you can do outreach within the community to just ask people about it informally, right? Without making it a front porch forum type of conversation, because it will just spin people out. But it'd be interesting to see. We've had some good input on it.
Yeah,
I agree. I think that the effectiveness would go up significantly if people knew that there was someone they could ask for advice or at least interpretation of concerns that they ethical concerns that they may have, without moving into a more formal thing. But also the suggestion was made about if they felt a complaint was warranted, then having someone available to help them craft such a complaint, I think would up the value of everybody's time and effort in this.
So you think that the committee's role should be to help a possible complainant write the complaint?
Whether that's the committee or someone external, I could go either way depending on how people feel. But I think my sense is that for a lot of people, the idea of unless you can change the format of the form in some way to make it more user-friendly, I think there is someone who can present an unbiased viewpoint, who is actually just looking at, who's knowledgeable about the ethics ordinance and can work with someone who believes they have a complaint to put that into a document that would convey their concerns in a way that would be most helpful to the committee to act upon.
So I might be misunderstanding you, but I think that puts the members of the committee in an unusual position. If they are helping someone write a complaint and then they're going to hear the complaint.
Right, and I think that what was stated is that if it was a committee member, then that committee member would recuse themselves from that complaint. I think the idea of an ombudsman in general for the town is a very laudatory idea, and that would be something I would support. Someone that would be able to not just deal with complaints of the ethics ordinance, but concerns in general about how the town is provided, and a number of other things that have come up in discussion. And so that idea of having someone who would play that role in a neutral position might have great value.
I think the committee, and I think the committee should weigh in on this since I'm such a newcomer, but I do think the committee has talked for a long time about whether the committee, there should be an investigator and how that would be handled. The investigator would be somebody, if a complaint is made, it's sort of the same concept, Josh. If a complaint is made, you can investigate to see if there are enough facts to establish probable cause. And so that's a question that the committee has for us. It might fall into that category in terms of does the board feel that that's something we want to have as part of our municipal matrix? And both are big questions. Should there be an independent ombudsman? We talked about that. Maybe appointing or asking for volunteers when a complaint is made. We certainly have plenty of people in our community who could fill that role. Whether it should be a committee member who then is recused for purposes of fielding complaints, whether there should be rotating fielders, if you will, members on the committee who are on for a month and then, not on again for another 5 months, depending on membership, whether to increase the membership of the committee so that you have enough other members. Should one member be assigned to investigate or prosecute, if you will, the complaint? It all gets complicated. It's one of those problems where every time you think you're coming up with a solution, more questions get raised and your ordinance gets longer and a little more complicated. So striking that balance seems to be the challenge here, I think, in many ways. So those are all sort of addressed in Lee's very brief memo. And I think we need to be able to consider whether or not we want to do those things at all or leave interpretation of the ordinance up just to individuals who might have complaints without providing any assistance whatsoever. I'm on the fence, honestly, as to what is best for our town.
And so is the committee. So what I'm hearing is, at this point, you're open to the idea of us pursuing these areas, ombudsperson, investigator, but bottom line, and people to help both the person to file a complaint and the respondent, who's the public officials who responding to the complaint, but bottom line, all the people who provide either this assistance or advisory opinions or investigation are not
separate the investigation from the ombudsman. I think that's important to think about that.
That's a whole different person too, a whole different role too. Are you saying don't do it at all, or are you saying a separate?
I'm saying don't conflate the investigatory powers with an ombudsman.
Agreed.
Because they're two different things to me.
Totally agree.
Okay.
But in any case, the bottom line is the people who are adjudicating are not the people who are doing these other roles. Whether it's people on the committee who just do that and then recuse, or whether it's other people in the community who do it. We don't know yet, but we will see what other towns across the country have done in this area to avoid these conflicts. Because I agree with Dr. Parker that you can't have someone adjudicating who's also helping or giving advice.
My view is a little different. My view is that the committee should be reliant on itself and not on external skills or conveniences. I don't think the committee ought to rely on an outside anything. I think it ought to rely on its own, on itself. And in this case, I am troubled by the idea of an investigator, a third party, not for budgetary reasons, but for the fact that it voids the community sense of what we are all here doing as volunteers. And I don't want to see us bolt a community in such a form, in general or in this particular. So I would be troubled by, even to some degree, ombudsman. I would not be troubled by the committee suggesting a restructuring in order to strengthen its ability to deal with these things on its own, i.e. more members, more training, more resources made available other than legal, more potentially a staff help. We've never discussed staff help to the committee, and yet other boards and commissions have considerable staff help. But I would draw the line personally between inside and outside, and I would favor everything inside, and I would not favor stuff outside.
Well, would you be open to inside if we had a member who did these things from inside?
Correct.
But then recuse himself from the hearing?
Absolutely. I mean, that would be reliance on yourself.
So, would you be open to an inside ombudsperson who would help someone file a complaint?
Well, I think that would depend a lot on the role and how enabling you are of a complaint.
Our history has been, we've received complaints that we couldn't do anything with because they weren't written well, they didn't say anything, they didn't point to a violation.
But why do you feel you'd have to do something with them in that case?
Because we think that there was something there, but the
if it wasn't
complainant was
evident,
unable to
why would you
articulate it.
presuppose there was something there?
But I think.
Josh, there's a question pending.
That's,
sorry, I couldn't hear that.
that's our experience.
That may be where we.
And
just-
it may be because, yeah, you weigh in.
Well, sorry. So one of our guiding principles is that this should be as user-friendly as possible. I have to say I was a little concerned when the number of lawyers outweighed the number of non-lawyers at one point in the conversation. So, no offense. It's great to have lawyers who have been helping, but
we love them.
Yes, no, and it's very helpful because you are dealing with issues that could
Absolutely.
potentially have legal consequences.
Absolutely.
So, The problem, I guess, is that in seeking to make this user-friendly, we didn't always succeed. And so we were stuck feeling that the public was struggling with the difficulties of writing a complaint and that it wasn't fair, that we couldn't ask them or say by the structure of the ordinance as it's written, ask for clarification or ask for, could you explain this in person or any other resources? So I think that's where this idea of the ombudsman comes from. Is there a way, if there were an easy way to construct the ordinance so that it was clear and transparent always and that anybody could just, who felt that they had a grievance.
I agree with you. I just want to make it clear that this ombudsman would support both a complainant and a respondent. It's important to keep that in mind, that one of the challenges they may have had, and I can't speak for this, but may have been on the respondent side, right? They want the ability to be able to at least take a statement or have a conversation, right, as part of the process. So I think there's value there. I just am
But that's
more study needed around what the structure of that looks like.
The current ordinance does not allow us to call in the complainant to explain it or to ask the complainant questions. Judges in small claims court, where there are non-attorneys, ask the complainant and respondent questions at the hearing. We, under the ordinance, we've been prohibited from doing that. So maybe if we at least did that, that might help. But I think the ombudsperson would help even more, to help both the complainant and the respondent, to be able to answer the questions that we might have for them.
Josh, you want a question?
Yeah, I mean, I was just, it's more of a concurrence with, I was very attracted to Lee's comment about looking to see how other municipalities have dealt with this. I mean, we got such good information from the review that was provided. I think we probably don't have to reinvent the wheel, but again, I'm strongly in favor of providing assistance because for a lot of people, these kinds of things are both intimidating and difficult to understand. And if we want this to be effective, we have to make it as easy as possible for people to deal with it.
I also would just comment that we should tread very carefully on the degree to which we open up investigatory powers, subpoena power, even if it's authorized, which I think we're still trying to get our heads around. Beyond that, I think standard of proof, I think we feel pretty good about preponderance being the baseline for that. I don't know if we need to spend time here, but Mary and I will continue to help educate the group and provide our collective recommendation. Funding's one we haven't talked about. I'm somewhat cognizant of not overreacting to recent events on this. So I'm trying to think about what change, if any, needs to be made there to address it, keeping in mind that the charter governs funding authority.
On that point, I don't think it's that difficult to come up with the idea that in the way a lot of other committees, a lot of other parts of the town have a budget, that doesn't mean that entire budget gets spent, but I don't see why there would be a problem for the committee to have a line item that's a budget for their use. And then it takes a lot. Then that ensures the independence of the committee, that they know they have the funds to use if they so need them. And I don't see why that would be that different from a lot of other situations. The only way I think if they needed more, then yes, then they would have to probably come and ask. But I think having that security of saying there is X amount of money at your discretion. And I think that's something the select board can make a decision on fairly easily.
I'm not sure how immediate that question is. It's a budget question, really, in the end. And before we're not long in entering budget season, where it will be brought up again, I'm sure, no doubt. How germane is that to your reorganizing?
It does not need to be in the ordinance.
Yeah.
I agree. I've always felt it should be in the budget. I put a budget request in every year. And if it's in the budget, it doesn't need to be in the ordinance.
Would it be enough for the committee to know that it sounds as if the board in most of its number would be more than willing to consider a budget in budget for committee purposes? Is that enough to know at this point?
Right. The existing ordinance now says we shall not spend any money without the approval of the town manager.
Correct.
So if we're going to delete that, what do we replace it with?
Oh, I see, okay. Well, I should think you could say without the approval of the select board. That ought to answer it for...
Yeah, right, but if you could do a budget adjustment, I don't know if you do that in Shelburne, but if you could do a budget adjustment and give us the budget at the time you sign the ordinance, we're all set.
But that's the difficulty I'm trying to raise with you, Lee, is that we're I don't know how possibly we would do that. We're in a budget, a conclusion of 1 year, we're about to start another, and we're some 2 months away from discussions on the third.
I'm thinking state government. I don't know how town budgeting works.
Yeah.
But in state government, you could do it. But
well, that's why we pay such money to the state, right?
And I'm uncomfortable until we know exactly what the powers of the committee are going to be, and what you potentially would be using that funding for.
Well, then it becomes immediate at the time you write the ordinance. If it said without the approval of the select board, then in that we've had 3 or 4 or 5 of our complaints in the last year involving a select board member, it becomes problematic.
Forgive me to make it as simple as I can make it. Do you need a budget figure in this to complete your work on an ordinance?
No.
Josh, let's hear what Lee's answering.
Let's say the ordinance goes into effect September 1, and a complaint gets filed on September 15.
Okay.
And we decide we can't use the town council, we need special counsel to help assist us.
Okay.
How do we access the money on September 15?
And my point is assist you to do what? Like, we're still trying to determine exactly what your role and powers are.
Okay, well, let's say there's a complaint. For some reason, the town manager is conflicted because it may involve a select board member, and all we want is advice on how to proceed.
But forgive me, Lee, but we could discuss
proceed.
speculative questions all night long about. My question to you is again, maybe I haven't phrased it adequately. To complete your work on a revised ordinance, do you need a statement in it that says you have access to X number of dollars in town budget?
No, I won't answer.
Or will a statement to the effect that
you don't need the quantum. The question in the ordinance is whether
you have access.
How we can access money if the town manager refused to respond to our request because of the difficulty that it put him in, as he put it.
I think the easy solve on this is to just make it either the chair or the vice chair of the select board. And the likelihood of both of those public officials being the subject of complaints is pretty low.
I'm not sure why.
In my opinion.
His question was that right now it requires approval. Why? What would be so difficult to replace that line for with something that said the ethics committee can use funding as allocated by the select board in the budget process.
Because every other committee that we give a budget to, we know what they're doing with that budget.
Right.
There's parameters for what they're using it for.
Right.
And in
And
this,
this is-
there's no parameters. That's actually what we're trying to establish, where they're going to go with
those parameters
investigation.
could be stated in general terms, as Lee has said, if you needed a council. So I think it's a relatively narrow number of things that possibly that money could be used for, but I don't see why. I think what we're striving for in this is a certain degree of independence for the ethics committee, and for them to have to ask for permission or ask for approval to do their work in this committee is completely different from any other committee. I don't think it's unreasonable that the select board would be able to identify a figure in the budget process, and that in the ordinance itself, it would just refer to funding as provided to the committee by the select board.
So again, you keep saying their work. We're not really sure what the scope of their work is, so I don't feel comfortable approving just a line item for funding when we don't know what that scope of work is.
And what I'm saying is, I think that would be the direction to the committee to come up with that line, that phrase that would encompass the kinds of things that would be that kind of budget would be used for. I don't think that's a big, I think we're talking numbers of words here.
I don't think we have consensus on this, unfortunately.
By the time you sign off on the ordinance, you will know the scope of our work, because our scope will be only as what the ordinance says we can do. At that time, you could say, for the rest of this fiscal year, the committee can spend up to so much money, and you can do from your discretionary funds, can spend so much money, and then after that, they have to come for and make their request for an annual budget.
Well, it may be, Lee, we get as far as saying as budgeted. I'm not
Or
sure
as
we
budgeted.
take the additional 3 or 4 steps that you're.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. My point is, you were interested in guidance and direction, and I think you've gotten, while the opinion's mixed, I think you've gotten probably a fundamental understanding that there's a budget process to be observed here, and if you can accommodate that in your text, personally, I'd be okay with that. Yeah,
we will work towards that. The guidance we received and everything else has been very helpful. It'll help us to move forward. The funding we can put off until we see how everything else goes. Yes.
We do understand the problem with the funding question is that the person approving could be conflicted. And so we have to figure out a way that whether the select board is approving, whether the town manager is approving, if the event arises that conflict puts whoever is approving in an awkward position or a conflicted
Yeah, we need to
position.
solve that.
We need to solve that.
Yeah,
So
no
there
question.
needs to be a way to solve that, and Lee has a way to solve it.
Yeah, no question.
I think there just needs to be visibility to how the money's
I
being
agree, I'm
used.
sensitive
That's
to
the
that,
black
too.
box
Yeah,
that I
and
think
we
some
also
of
have
us
the
have
charter and the parameters of the
concerns
charter.
about, that's all.
Yeah, this is one of these conflicts.
Were
that
there
we should
other
resolve.
questions, Lee or Mike or Tom or anybody that you had that you were especially interested in?
Well, I had a question, really. I mean, this talks about the powers of the committee, but it doesn't really talk about, really what the essence of the ethics ordinance is. And that's really what I thought was going to be discussed and modified. And, going back to the memorandum or the charge by the state was for every community to develop their own conflict of interest ordinance. And that has morphed or changed into an ethics ordinance in which various members might have different opinions on what exactly constitutes an ethics violation versus a conflict of interest violation.
Right. The current draft, which I thought you had access to, talks about prohibited conduct, which is almost entirely financial conflicts of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree with that statement.
Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is a delicious problem, really. If you could interest Waldorf School or even some UVM components, this is a wonderful, wonderful experience of self-governance.
Mm-hmm.
All these issues just, they're shot through all this. And I can't thank you enough for the dedication and the energy and thoughtfulness that you're supplying this, for the willingness of two of our colleagues to spend their extra time on it. And it seems in the end, maybe not everybody's cup of tea to have to sit and listen to, but it's a pretty basic, fundamental piece of our self-governance. And I think it's wonderful that we've all been willing to spend the time reading and researching and questioning. Josh, you want to add any further comments?
No, I don't think so.
Not that I want to.
I mean, I'll provide some comments in writing.
Colleen?
Did we want to discuss publicly the idea of recusals? The history of practice versus violations of that?
Colleen
Or
is
deviations of that
pointing out,
also.
Josh, one of the items, recusals.
Are we going to discuss that? Yeah, I mean, do you want to? I'm
We can.
not sure what you're asking.
You know, do you
Did you want direction on
do you
that?
want to comment, Colleen, on that?
Well, they asked for some direction regarding whether a public official who recuses should leave the room, which has been the history of practice. But there's one board member that believes otherwise. So maybe we should at least publicly have a consensus of exactly what we think recusal means and how it should be treated, because then we can be consistent all along the board.
If you want my opinion, my sense, and it hasn't changed, is that the concept of recusal is to not participate in the discussion in any way. That does not mean that not being part of the discussion, not being physically present at the table is not being part of the discussion, but restricting their knowledge of what that discussion is, I don't think serves necessarily a purpose. And I would certainly be comfortable with the idea of and certainly there's probably a definition somewhere of truly, or maybe there are multiple definitions of what recusal is. But my understanding is what you do not do is participate in the discussion.
And I believe that it's more of, do not participate in the conversation and discussion, but also the idea of removing yourself from the room is also to prevent influencing the conversation.
I'm going to interrupt my two colleagues here. I'm not happy to do so, Josh or Colleen, but we have a continuing matter of litigation in which this issue of recusal occurs, and I think it's probably I'm searching for the word. It's not premature, but I think it's probably a little out of across the lines to discuss this publicly.
I'm fine with that.
Okay? My sense of recusal, if you value one opinion, is that you absent yourself. In previous lives in municipal government, I can tell you that I used to empty the building, sometimes in very bad weather and with wicked tempers when people returned. But we literally emptied the building. So my sense is a little different than others' than other opinions. But I think we're best to probably move on from this issue at the moment.
I've been researching other codes in towns across the country, and I came up with something that I thought was a fairly good solution. I'll present it to the group when the committee next meets, and the two select board liaisons to see what they think.
I did have a question. You indicated that if a complaint is filed against an ethics committee member, would all the other members need to recuse? And I was uncertain about why that would necessarily be why that would be a possibility.
Because it happened.
Well, that doesn't help me, frankly.
Okay.
I wasn't there.
Okay.
Why?
Well, according to the Shelburne News, a complaint was filed against me. The other members recused, and the select board appointed a temporary ad hoc committee.
None of the members of the committee felt that they could be impartial, I think, in that circumstance.
And because of the perception, and
Thanks, Tom.
so we were and I think they didn't need to recuse, but the ordinance should make that clear. But that's why it's up for discussion.
So the question is whether you install provisions that say the members must or the members
say-
can.
Well, I think that we haven't figured out how it should be phrased, but
That's
that
why
we
the-
want to address the issue. That's why it's on the list.
And that's why the current ordinance contemplates a pro-temp committee, for that very reason.
Sorry, not to drag this on, but there is this principle that you shouldn't allow for a way to recuse by just filing a complaint.
Right.
Right, so if we said that you had to recuse if a complaint is filed against a member, that creates a tactic that could be used to
Empty it out.
empty it out.
Yeah.
So these are other kind of.
Although we talked about,
Okay.
ultimately the decision is with the public official
Okay,
to
thank
recuse.
you.
So this goes on and on and on, as everybody can
Right.
tell
I
here.
think we need some clarification
Yeah.
on that. If there's a way to clarify it,
Thank
it
you.
would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here as well.
No, is there
It
any
says a lot
other,
about
any other
the
discussion from
commitment
the
level.
board? Josh? Any other discussion from the board? Colleen?
No.
And any discussion from the committee and from the public? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate.
It's been a long night.
The next item is the Village Center transportation issues. I'm going to ask Lee to summarize quickly his view. Jamie does have one, as we know, that he initiated at the last meeting when we pended this to tonight. I'm interested to hear that.
You want to tee it up?
Thank you. So, as you know, there was an application to the Regional Planning Commission in their UPWP, their work plan, that was contemplated to be done during this fiscal year. The funding was appropriated this fiscal year. Here we are nearly at the end of May. There's been some public discussion about, do we need another study? Can't we just do things? Well, when we go to just do things, it's important to have a strategic, coherent plan as to what those things might be. What's most important? What's the best bang for the buck? Which elements can we influence? Which can we not? So Dean and I talked about this at great length. There was great consensus at the last meeting that we needed a plan to synthesize all of these studies. The original plan was not to do, quote, another study to gather more data, but indeed to do that very work. So we felt that this was a project that might well be done more in-house with existing horsepower committees. We've had a lot of interested citizens involved in this process over the course of time. I sometimes become overly ambitious about how many projects we can do simultaneously. My thought was, let's harness that positive energy and momentum and let's do it this summer. Dean was helpful in tempering some of that, and so ultimately the recommendation, as you've seen, was that we would try to facilitate a process using those existing studies, using existing committees and interested citizens, but can't commit to doing it immediately. There's just too much else going on right now. I know there may be interest in revisiting that. The Regional Planning Commission is open and willing to revisiting the question of doing this study with us. It depends on timing, circumstance, and ultimately whether money that was appropriated in this fiscal year could be carried over to the next fiscal year, because if not, it kind of puts the Regional Planning Commission element to rest, and we agree as a community that we will commit to doing this at some point in this coming fiscal year. Because ultimately, these things are not important just for their own sake, but also to feed into other community programs such as the town plan, the capital planning and budget, which ultimately is where we look to funding many of these projects we might wish to do. So that's all part of the big package. It's not just kind of throwing darts and saying, well, I think I need a crosswalk here, we need a beacon there, we need stripes over here, because then it becomes a more random process and we're not really sure where the best bang for the buck and the most effectiveness may be. Not advocating lengthy, drawn-out processes. Planners are often known for that. Others are. I'm about trying to help things happen, but in a coherent, integrated fashion. So that's what we've come to you with a recommendation for. Thank you.
So, thank you. I'm going to challenge you on the random piece of it, because my experience is we have, and I'm all for a strategic plan as well, by the way. I feel like we have enough tactical recommendations in our hands to actually do some things and also keep progressing this broader study, which is a longer term project, right? We have the near term things we can do, in my mind. Whether we have funding or not is something we need to look at and challenge ourselves to find it, given everything else we're trying to prioritize. But my concern is that if we punt on this and push it off to the fall, which becomes the winter, and then it'll take us time to just get the right people in a room to do this, we're going to lose some momentum and focus on this. So I raise that as just a concern of, if we pause on this, I feel like it might just start to lose momentum. I think, and I haven't looked at all the studies, by the way. I'm familiar with some of them, as Dean knows.
Quite a few.
There are quite a few in there. But I do think there's enough interest and engagement in the community to, and I know I've oversimplified this for some people, but I do feel like we can put some people in a room, look at this stack of documents, and just start pulling the recommendations onto one document to at least, and I know it will be out of context in some ways, but to at least put it on paper to the point where we can have a conversation this summer and start to think about what's the best way to prioritize it and how do we budget for those priorities. I think the synthesis really can happen at a grassroots level. I don't know if I'm not giving enough credit to the experts and people externally that we'd typically look to do this, but I'm throwing it out there as something to challenge ourselves to do. Keeping in mind, I do want to tackle some of the near-term things, and I don't, you're the professional here, but I think there are some things here we can do, and Falls Road comes to mind as we spent a lot of time, and I know some people are very vocal about it, but I think most people in town would agree that that's the most dangerous strip in town, putting aside Route 7, right? So it feels like there's pretty strong consensus with there's a priority here for a corridor that needs some attention. We have some ideas that folks in town have developed and we can react to. And what does it take to execute on a handful of those ideas? I'll stop.
I'll weigh in very briefly. I've talked to a number of folks, Lee, as you know, and I've talked to some stakeholders in this, bless you, Colleen. And I've had trouble with the idea of not accessing the expertise of the Planning Commission, the Regional Planning Commission. If there's, if they were going to do work that was valued at around $40,000, saying no to that to me was hard, because I understand that the RPC has expertise and that they weren't going to be doing another study. They were going to be synthesizing all of these conclusions. But if there isn't the appetite for that, I would say then that I would follow your suggestion, Jamie, and make sure that the right stakeholders were there. I would want to see the Paths Committee there. I'd want to see Natural Resources there. I'd want to see the police there, and maybe have a 4 or a 6 hour meeting. I like that idea. I'll just say, though, that the board was supposed to have a couple of retreats. We've had one, and our agenda wasn't entirely as I expected anyway, because we got taken up with some other matters. And I'm just saying that it's easy to lose momentum for these aspirational things. So I worry about that. And so that's why I felt like, well, shoot, if we give it to the RPC and they're going to get, it's their job to carry it out. No, maybe I'm wrong and they don't work any more quickly than we as a group could. I lack the experience for that. So I just want to make sure if we go down the road you're proposing, that we really, 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 really do it for the reasons that you suggest. I've been in touch with, I'm sure many of you have, with Bruce Nunziata, who's, very vocal and very concerned about Falls Road. There's concern about Bay Road. I travel Bay Road every day, and it can be very frightening. And there's some things we could do now, for example, even before the bridge is replaced, that can improve it. Wendy Seville told me today that people who live in that neighborhood drive their kids to school, even though they should be walking or riding their bikes to get to the tie path because of fear of the congestion that happens there in the morning and how narrow the road is. So,
well, I'd say, not to interrupt you, but Bay Road proved very challenging.
No, but there's little things
Carter
that can
hasn't. As far as I know, there's nobody putting their hands up saying this is a terrible idea.
What?
I live on Mercer Road since 1984. There's been studies done, 5 studies. Nothing has been done.
No.
Nothing.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm not. We're all. That's what we're. There's just a lot of people who have lots of differing opinions that we need to kind of.
I think
coalesce.
there's very strong alignment on this very discrete piece of doing some real things that we can do.
I'm not arguing with you at all. I'm just making
I
sure that we have all of the stakeholders at the table.
I agree.
And I was also digressing, so I apologize.
Do you want to comment, Josh?
Only, I agree. It seems like it's a doable thing, and I don't think we should lose momentum. But I come back each time, as previously stated, every time we discuss another area, another thing that needs to be done, and there's questions about how it should be done. The concept of having a long-term strategic plan, of understanding where we are in 5 and 10 years of all this kind of planning, the comprehensive planning, the wastewater planning, the stormwater planning. It just seems to, not to put more on our plate, but it just seems like we should have an integrative process by which each of these kinds of planning activities fits or is working towards an accepted goal of where we want the town to be in X number of years. And that's what I keep hearing in all of these discussions is this, how do we get this done? How do we get this done? How do we get this done? And while they may all be good questions, my experience says those are easier questions to deal with if you know the larger framework in which those questions have to be asked.
I think we probably all agree, Josh, and I think we're going to have a series of opportunities, in effect, a long-running opportunity when we review sections of the comprehensive plan to be thinking about,
Can I make
I'm sorry.
a question? Did I interrupt? I'm sorry, Jerry. I think we have money in the budget for, and Dean, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is some money in the budget already, the $7,500 to do this. And I'm wondering if we take this alternative path that you're suggesting, Jamie, and also I think that Lee suggested at the last meeting, would it make sense, or could we use some of that money to hire just a facilitator, somebody to help facilitate the conversation that I think you're suggesting we have, where we all get in one place at one time to prioritize?
I'm not suggesting I have a bias against spending more money to look at studies that are already in the can.
Not to look at the study.
To
but
facilitate a priority.
The conversation that we have, just somebody who could just, I'm envisioning taking notes, or getting people to talk, organizing all of the ideas that people have, and helping to prioritize and all that.
I think there could be benefit there to trying to prioritize it.
I'm not talking about
with
spending a lot of
third party,
money.
But I think we have capable people in town who can do it.
All along in here, but our discussion began with whether we were going to up the amount of money from $7,500 to $9,000 as a match for an existing program initiative.
Yes.
And in the discussion, interestingly enough, we were not willing as a body to increase the amount. And furthermore, we were not overtly supportive of the whole idea of the study in the first place. That's led us to consider alternative ways of accomplishing some of the objectives of the study, which were largely synthesis.
Right.
And I'm kind of still focused on how we could accomplish the objectives of that study, not ignoring, but leaving aside now the question of the monies, what those monies may be best put to as a use, if not to calming measures and others. But my sense is that the idea of a committee, a committee of three special masters of a kind, who can sit and sift through material almost like appraisers. You can sit with the pot, and between the three of them tell you, from what Indo, Andean horizon it came, and whose ceramic touch was whose. That seems to me a very doable, a timely, and an initiative that respects the amount of resource we have in this community. That doesn't require expenditure of other than goodwill and time on the parts of some of our fellow citizens, and as a progressive start to deciding how much further we want to pursue any kind of consultation on that task, or whether that small number, having arrived at some general synthesis of the material that's already in hand, may have recommendations as to what the greater need is from there, and we go from there. I don't share your view that we can't up our game to take care of this. I think we have to, for no reason other than the fact that we do then have potentially a resource to expend, but more importantly, perhaps, we have a budget to begin deliberating. And this is healthy, important information to that process, and it can't wait.
We already have a plan in some ways. We have a capital improvement plan that reflects some of these.
Yeah.
Probably doesn't reflect enough of them in some people's opinion.
So it informs.
But we already have a plan there that should be looked at when we're looking at the studies together with the comprehensive plan, which is consistent, by the way, with
But I'd like to challenge
most of what we're talking about.
In terms of your idea of selecting three people, because the process, in my view, has to be inherently democratic. And I don't know who you would select to be these three people who would have these like special master powers to make decisions about how to prioritize or an action plan, or maybe just, are you suggesting they write a report that summarizes all the existing reports?
What do 7 studies in plastic binders say?
Okay.
Yeah, I have, if I may, because I think we're more aligned than we may appear appear to be, because I agree that we can rise to the challenge as a community. I can't speak for Dean's time, he's already flat out, I'm flat out, but I think from a staged approach, we could summarize the studies objectively. Study A, set of recommendations. Study B, set of recommendations. Personally, I think the idea then of bringing the community together, have a half-day workshop, bring in a facilitator to look at those, facilitate the conversation, and hopefully at the end of that session, have it a morning session, we have coffee bagels, some light breakfast, spend a little money on food, get a skilled facilitator, we have a half-day workshop, and out of that we filter a set of short, medium, and long-term recommendations. They may be filtered both by time, by cost, by effectiveness, and just see where it lands. But I think we can rise to the challenge. I understand the desire to capitalize on momentum, and if it's the board's wish that we do this sooner than later, then let's rock and roll and get on with it.
That would be, I think Lee has said accurately what I've been unable to express so far this evening.
The village pedestrian safety.
Doris,
You got
would
it.
mind coming to the mic? Sorry.
Doesn't matter which one you vote. All right. The village pedestrians, I'm Doris Sage. The village pedestrian safety group, we're made up of a group of about 10, maybe 15 on some days. We work together. We've done all kinds of pop demonstrations to see how quickly the traffic moves on Falls Road, on Marsetts Road, on Lower Falls Road, because it's really a cut-through straight up to Spear Street. And we found a great deal of information doing that. And we really work as a group. And I think that you'll find that most communities or streets just want it to change. They'll get right out there and do the work. They just need a little bit of funding for the speed limit written down. It would be really nice to have a crosswalk on Marset Road with lights so I don't get hit, for one, because there are a lot of people that come from, not the time, but where you live, Jerry, Gables. And a lot of people walking. There's a 3-mile loop there. Many people, the terraces. We just need some help, some funding. But the communities are out there wanting to get the work done to make it safer for us. That's all we want.
So, which addresses that neighborhood, and if that committee had like a list of priorities, and they would, and right, but actually in order of what you think needs to be done first.
We have those.
Yeah.
Jane and Tom are here, right.
Doris, can I speak to?
Sure.
Just to add on to what you're saying.
Did you finish, Colleen?
Well, it seems like whenever the public or that committee comes before us, they're like, okay, we want to do like 20 things, and so we did a few things last year, and we're doing more things this year, but I guess it seems a little bit nebulous about which are the most important to various members of that committee. And I know it's this non-official committee, but you guys are the ones that live there, so you know that space better than anybody else. But if one person thinks absolutely we need to have dividers, and we need to have, and somebody else says no, we need a crosswalk with lights, that's the number one priority, and that's when it starts getting confusing.
Okay, yes, thank you for that beginning to what I want to say. Jane Zanotti, I facilitate the Village Pedestrian Safety Group, and it's timely that you bring that up because we're actually working on a document right now that kind of documents what we've done, what's still pending, and what are some of the things that we're looking at for the future. And it's in draft form right now. It'll probably be, it needs to go to our committee in June, but before it gets disseminated. But we wanted to bring that to you as a way to help perhaps in this process of looking at, we've developed a vision statement with these things kind of supporting that vision. So that's kind of in response to your concern. I have several things I want to say is, just for yucks today, I kind of went through the file that Dean has on a Google file of all the studies for the village, and I made a list of them and added up the pages, and there's 500 pages of studies.
How many studies?
Well, I have the list there, Tom. The list is there. I think it's about 12 or 15 studies. So I don't know if anybody was aware of the density of that work, but that's what's there. And so I'm not exactly sure how you weed through that. I think obviously our group, I'm very interested in seeing this move ahead and move ahead in a timely fashion. And I agree that we need kind of an overarching view of this. But I have to say that our group in the last 2 years has accomplished more probably than any other group that I know of in terms of tangible improvements on the ground with crosswalks, with signs in the crosswalks, with lowering the speed limit. And we're not even an official group. We do have money earmarked, and I was getting a little nervous listening to this discussion that maybe it means the things that are in plan for FY19 that were in the budget maybe aren't going to happen until this other work happens. So I certainly hope that that's not the case, because what is earmarked is the grass strip along Falls Road and improvements to the cemetery crosswalk to help slow the traffic. I want to add that some of our residents that live right by the Bacon Drive crosswalk that now has the sign up, not all the signs are up in the crosswalk yet, but they have noticed decidedly that traffic has slowed just with having those upright signs in the middle of the crosswalk, and that the cars are complying with pedestrians at a higher rate. We have people on our committee that live on either side of that crosswalk, and both of them gave that information. So, while it's been a bit like, okay, we're asking for this, I have to say that, as I said, more on-the-ground changes have happened over the last 2 years based on our committee's group than I've seen from much else. So I just want to, if we can come up with a comprehensive plan, great, but let's keep moving ahead.
Do you think it's unrealistic, since you've looked at it, do you think it's unrealistic to think 3 to 5 people in a room could synthesize? Or at least pull out the recommendations from those?
I just pulled up each and kind of glanced at what the content was. There's a lot of repeating information, and some of the studies refer back to the previous study. Right. So maybe it's not as big as the 500 pages looks, and some of that 500 pages are maps. I don't know. It seems I would probably only want to read and synthesize one to add to that conversation, maybe 2 if I were one of the readers. Yeah.
Would you rather, let me ask you this, would you rather pay someone to do that or use those dollars to actually do some of the things on your list?
I feel very mixed about that. I was convinced that we needed to bring in, that we should pay someone to do that. And then I got to thinking that, well, if there are multiple people contributing to this process, the buy-in's going to be even greater, and the momentum's going to be greater if you have a group working on it as opposed to one person working on it. So I have very mixed feelings about it.
It's fair.
I mean, there's
Thanks,
500 pages of documents, but there's not 500 pages of recommendations.
No, right. Yeah,
so,
they're usually buried at the back, and you can...
Not
Just
rocket science
go
to...
the summary page.
Now you get another Zanotti.
I could do that.
Tom Zanotti. This is a great discussion. I'm really glad we're having this. I think it's way overdue because there have been so many studies and town plans that don't always talk to each other, and sometimes they do. So I think a synthesis, and I don't like using the term study, Jerry. You have used that term a lot, and it really needs to be a synthesis, and I think we need to emphasize that. I do think it's, as I've written to you guys, I think it's a bit unrealistic to expect any kind of sizable group of town residents to come together and make sense of this stuff. It ain't gonna work. I think and you look at our timing now, we're going to the summer, people's vacations, people meeting, getting together to kind of pull this stuff together. On the short term, I don't think it's realistic. I do think there's merit, as I've written to you. I've gone back and forth about this, but I do think there's merit to making use of the money to hire an expert to do a very limited number of things. Is do that synthesis, but offer some sort of charge about through what lens do you want this person to look at these studies? Do you want to through the eyes of fiscal cost? Is it through aesthetic? Is it pedestrian access to the town? Is it vehicular movement? Or whatever lenses you want any entity to look through, you need to identify that, because these town plans and studies look at those various variables all over the place. So what your priorities are, I think, is an important factor in whoever does the synthesis. And I would err on hiring someone with that expertise. At that point, I think that there's great merit to bringing people together from town to kind of look at what that synthesis is telling us, and then look at what our priorities might be given the limitations of monies, given other priorities in town. So that's the best I can.
Alternatives, Tom, assuming we provide a lens, which is a point you've made which is a really good point. We contract with an individual to spend time to synthesize those studies.
Yeah.
Versus an initial step of fellow residents who review them.
Who and how many?
In some number. I mean, I'm not.
I was thinking like 2 to 3 people.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make an exact point of. Those are two different approaches.
Right.
Which of the two is preferable to you as a start?
Well, I think it's critical if you're naming somebody, people from town, who are they, and what are the expertise that they bring to the table?
And what's their agenda?
The advantage of making use of this additional $1,500 that layers into the 9 equals $40,000 potentially, is that you have someone with no vested interest in what these various studies and town plans say. It's someone who presumably has some expertise in this, who can create this piece of work for us to work off of as a select board, as a town. In my mind, that's as much as it may not engage the community as much initially as we might like, and as much as it might cost a little bit more money, and that might stick in the craw of a lot of people, I think that we can hopefully, if the time frame works with regional planning, I think there's a better shot at getting something of substance for us to start to work with within the next 3-4 months, ideally. My best thinking, and for what it's worth.
So Tom, you're saying the 5 of us should go off and maybe we hire someone, maybe we don't, and develop our own criteria to prioritize it, and then deliver a work product to the community to react to, right? Because it's only the 5 of us who would decide what those priorities are, which I'm not sure that that's
okay. Well, what's important? These are good questions. I don't have an answer right.
I'm just thinking through it out loud.
Yeah.
Because we could run off and do this, and the 5 of us will have conversations.
Yeah.
Jerry may feel like budget matters most.
Colleen, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, because this is exactly right. Like, I feel like we could pay somebody to synthesize this, and that person could be could say something to the effect of, well, given the, the concentration of traffic at this speed, on this road, the risk to damage to pedestrians is this. And so it's highest here. But if that's not the perception of the people that live there, then his recommendation means nothing, or her recommendation means nothing.
I'm not
And
looking
so
for recommendations. I wouldn't be looking for recommendations.
But we're looking for a list of priorities, right? On which to plan
See,
improvements.
I want themes. What are the things that kind of run for decades now, run through these various town plans and studies that kind of inform us about where are our problem areas and what are the possible solutions to those problem areas?
So when you keep saying, like, when you say town plans, and
That's among the things that I think within your, Dean, within your series of
because I would say that we can state which they are. We know the South Corridor, we know Bay Road, we know Falls Road and Marset. We know these areas already. So I guess I'm wondering, what are we going to ask that person to do? And that's why I was opposed to having this person do this study or that synthesize the study, is we don't even know what we're asking them to do. And even if they do come back with this idea of synthesizing all the studies of what they all mean, and then they're going to give us this list of recommendations of, in order, this is what you guys should do over the next 20 years. And I'd be like, it doesn't make any difference because...
Well, the same question has to be posed to a group of three that selected townspeople. I mean, how do you want this select group people of three to be looking at all this data, all this information?
And I don't. I like what you guys are doing. And you can give us a list of priorities that you think as a committee you think is important.
Well, we don't need to decide this tonight, necessarily.
Yeah,
and it's been a good conversation, and I think we'll have more.
Frankly, please understand that I don't feel firmly about this, but I've wrestled with this in my head a whole lot, and it's really hard for me to come up with the thing that makes most sense to me.
Yeah, as are we, clearly.
Yeah.
I think we're of different minds on this, and we haven't quite coalesced on a plan.
We have abandoned the study. Is that
The
definitely
study,
clear
the synthesis.
and formal, so that we can notify the planning commission? Do we have any formalities left that we haven't
If that's
accomplished?
where we're headed, that would be a helpful decision to land on.
Isn't that what we voted on last? I think we already did it.
Well, we couched it in terms of, no, I think we left open the possibility that it could be downsized and the 7,500 used. We've been focusing on 1,500, and it was not to do the extra 1,500. I don't believe we made a decision that said, don't do the 75 either.
What's the 75?
The original.
That was the original.
The original
batch.
cost share.
Originally, 7,500 was
budgeted.
budgeted to be our portion of
right.
the
Was budgeted.
synthesis.
And we
But
were
now
asked
it's gotta
to
be-
up it to 9, and we declined. We
I'm
said,
still declining.
we're not
I'm
going to up it to
comfortable.
9.
I don't need to do it right now with the RPC, is what I'm saying.
Could I just offer
Yeah,
one
my point-
more thought, and I'm going to shut up?
Just a minute, Tom. My
Okay,
point
sorry.
is, do we officially and formally abandon this study here and now?
I would like to hear from Dean before that we make a vote.
Okay.
Sorry, Tom.
I have no problem with the board deciding not to take this opportunity to do this work. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only other thing I would say is that Lee's memo summarized a pretty full discussion. You don't have all the possible ideas, but now it's really too late to get into that. But I have no problem with us declining this opportunity.
We get this on our next agenda then and further the discussion. We can vote tonight I thought we did last time that jettison this and move forward. I'm glad to hear from Dean. It gives me greater comfort. And
No, I think we're all aware of the time and the amount of agenda left, and we'll excuse ourselves even now to you, John, and Chris for sure, and we owe great excuses to ourselves because we have an executive session coming up that's going to take quite a long time.
Oh, no.
My point is for purposes of accomplishment and self-esteem as a board, I think it would be useful to abandon formally and finally this initiative. So that we're beyond that point, and then to come back on the 12th with a series of ideas as to what are the most useful next steps, including some contributions from all of us on appropriate lenses, as Tom's identified them.
Yeah, I would just say we're not abandoning it. We're declining the RPC opportunity at this time. That's all.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, abandoned doesn't sound
right.
very good.
Yeah.
So I will defer to one of you who makes a motion that has much more appropriate language.
No, I'm not going to make the motion because I feel, I
don't know if we need a motion. Yeah.
We have a consensus of the board.
We can direct
negative motion.
directly to
Okay. Is that
advise the RPC accordingly.
Does that do, Dean? Is that enough? Okay. All right.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay.
Tracy wants to say something.
Tracy.
I'm just wondering, for on the next agenda, can you start a little earlier on this item at all? Instead of starting like at 8:30 and then it gets later?
Honestly, Tracy, we've been trying.
Okay.
We've been sensitive to the fact that Chris Robinson has sat here night after night.
No, I know that, but I mean, the next agenda, when you put it on the agenda next time?
We've been trying to move things around and get earlier. We got a little, we were probably surprised, most of us tonight, that the discussion of dispatch went on for a much, much longer time than anybody anticipated, which was great.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point, Tracy. It really is. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to keep trying.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that sufficient direction about the?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, super. Any other comments from anybody on that matter? None. Thank you. And it is now Peter and Chris's opportunity. We're going to get to John. We're going to get to you pretty quickly, John. So.
I may be the only night owl in the room.
At least it's not winter, and you're going to have 8 inches of snow in your car when you get out, right?
Projector shut down.
Oh, I know. I'm concerned about. We have to make that.
Try to talk about the wastewater budget, which we're not actually to act on today.
Josh, have you got their material?
Yep, I do.
It's more just an overview to give you an idea of what's in the proposed budget. And again, Chris Robinson is wearing his wastewater superintendent hat tonight, my other responsibilities. But the draft budget that we sent out in the package, total expenses $1.9 million. It's a 0.9% increase from the current budget year we're in right now. Again, this budget will start July 1st. The total volumes that we're anticipating or budgeting to be billed is about the same as we have seen in the past, 134.5 million gallons. The proposed budget that you have in front of you will not require a rate increase. And basically, as the rates stay the same as they are now, a family of using about 70,000 gallons of water or sewage a year. It's about $920 cost, and a smaller family, 20,000 gallons a year, about $263 a year, just as a perspective. In terms of the expenses of the $1.92 million in the budget, the biggest percentage is our debt service, paying off actually still paying on the original plant upgrade that occurred in the early 90s, as well as the other projects that have been going on, including the bond project, $3 million bond project that was passed a few years ago. We're about halfway into that bond fund with projects that are taking place this construction season. Other significant pieces, salaries and benefits. We have the wastewater department has a staff of 5 people. Again, Chris's position is being more and more shared between wastewater and the stormwater project. And then the other, obviously, capital, operating and maintenance. When you're running 2 treatment plants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's operating costs, electricity and maintenance and everything else. So that just gives you an idea of the operating expense increases in the proposed budget. Chemical costs go up every year. One project that Chris is working on is in reducing the phosphorus discharge, changing to a different chemical, polyaluminum chloride. And that's used at plant 1, I believe. Try it again to improve the reduce the phosphorus discharge and improve the quality of the sludge that Chittenden Solid Waste District is responsible for taking and disposing of. Insurance costs, that's just, again, because of the property and the equipment that we've got, and just the general increase in inflation of insurance rates and hit to the budget. Employee benefits, as you might guess, health insurance and those types of things, again, with 5 employees, there's a cost associated with that. And sludge disposal, you heard from the Chittenden Solid Waste presentation, there's an increase in that expected. And also, Chris will be doing some tank clean-out projects in the upcoming year. Decreases in the budget, plant maintenance, again, just by some of the work that's been done and completed. Chris was able to reduce that some. Project engineering, I believe that was associated with the plant consolidation study that you'll be getting part 2 of at your next meeting, and then that will be completed for the board's information to consider as to what the next step are. And debt service is down on our short-term debt. The past year, a utility truck that we purchased, we were thinking would be financed over 5 years, but given where we were at budget-wise, we paid for it all in 1 year. Same thing with a piece of equipment that was aging, and that was also paid off in 1 year. So debt service is down from what we had originally thought it would be. We still have obviously a lot of long-term debt associated with the projects that have been completed and are ongoing now. Capital projects, pretty limited for the new budget year. The Bay Colony Pump Station, that was a misprint. I think I said Bay Road. It's actually the Bay Colony Pump Station that Chris clarified. We'll be rehabbing that to come in compliance with state mandated storage requirements. I understand it, that are working on the pump stations on the system to meet those requirements. Some have been completed. Bay Colony would be the next up. And then the project that's going on right now that was contracted for this construction season is $1.8 million of the $3 million bond that's currently underway. That project will probably be wrapping up this construction season. The bond payments will be hitting next year, so in the next budget year. So that was really kind of our thought process in putting this budget together, was to try to do some of the projects that were coming up down the road, but maybe we've got some capacity to do now. And then looking at next year, when we've got probably a $140,000 debt payment coming in associated with the project that's being done now, to try to minimize the rate impact of that with trying to get some of the other projects done earlier. Historical usage of gallons, it's been kind of hard to predict. Again, with conservation, and again, the sewer usage is based on what the water meter reads. So whatever the water meter reads in usage, that's what we bill for our customers for for wastewater use. And you can see it's been up and down. Again, it's somewhat weather dependent. If you have a dry summer, there's more water being used, and that again would factor into what we charge for the rates. So we're pretty much projecting that the upcoming budget year will be about flat in terms of the gallons that we'll be putting through the system. I've cut down what I was going to say to about 2 minutes, so if you have any questions, again, we're not asking you to act on it at this point, but if there's more information that you'd need for the next meeting, that's when we would be asking for your approval of this wastewater budget.
How do you forecast the usage?
We trend it, look at what the usage has been over the years and just try to, if, in some cases the usage was going up for 2 or 3 years, you can see there, and then we got caught the next year it went down. Conservation, smaller households, things like that, because we're predominantly a residential profile on the system. That's got to be factoring into it. More efficient appliances. And in some cases, you may have a big user one year that's doing something, and then the next year it backs off again. So it's hard to predict for sure. I mean, try to be conservative so that you can meet your targeted revenues.
And that figure you used is also a current figure.
I'm sorry.
That figure is also the current, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Peter, I'm not sure if this was included in something, but just in the spreadsheet, you tend to focus on things that under administrative expenses, there's a 58% increase. Could you elucidate on what that administrative expense is?
Right, and I think that needs to be revised, actually, Josh, thanks for bringing that up. But what that's intended to do there, with Chris's time, Chris was originally hired as the wastewater superintendent, so 100% of his time was spent in wastewater or sewer in the operations there. But then as he's come along and kind of been the lead person in our stormwater efforts, it's not fair to have the sewer users pay 100% of his salary, since it's really being spread over more than just the wastewater use. So his time has actually been increasing in terms of how much he's spending on stormwater, which is funded through the general fund budget. So we increased that allocation. So basically, while it's an expense, the administrative expense is increasing, it's actually being paid for by the town budget. So it's a transfer in that was doing that. And I need to fine tune that because I think that's overstated. The next version will have that reduced somewhat.
And this is not a decision item, correct?
Chris, do you want to point out anything? Make any comment? Or?
No, I think Peter covered everything. Did a great job.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Peter, for staying so late. I know, sorry, you were going to say something.
By way of reminder, the presentation we had, I think it was our very last meeting, about the possible consolidation of the 2 wastewater treatment plants. That plan doesn't potentially get triggered until 2023?
Yeah, it's estimated it's going to be probably 8 years out.
Okay. So that would,
if we were to move forward and stuff.
and you don't have a choice to spend that $40,000 over on the Bay Colony plant, right?
Our collection system would still have to be maintained.
Okay.
Separate from the facilities being transferred.
Okay, thank you.
So we would still be responsible for our pump stations, collection system, stuff like that. So.
Thank you very much.
No increase in the user fee is good news, so thank you
Yeah.
for the tight management and all the work you're doing.
That's good.
That's fantastic.
So we've probably got a little bit more fine tuning to do in the next version, but we'll still hold the line on the sewer rate and not have an increase. So.
Thank you, Peter.
Excellent.
Questions?
Thank you.
Questions, Josh?
No, I asked Mike.
Questions?
Nope. No.
Other members? No. Any questions from the public? None? Thank you so much. Thank you for being
Thank you.
patient. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
The next item, which Peter will also be helpful with us on, I should have asked Lee, did you have any comments you want to make? is to consider the contract with Sullivan and Powers, our auditors, which is the one-year extension that Peter's going to review. Do you want to do that, or you want to, Peter?
Let Peter do it, he's the expert here.
We talked at the last meeting, our contract with Sullivan Powers was completed with the audit that they presented to you in February. So we needed to make a decision as to whether we re-up with them or go out for bid. And the thought was, at this time, given the transition, potential transition in managers, not necessarily to lock into another long-term contract. So we did approach Sullivan Powers about going with a one-year agreement, which they agreed would be possible. They did submit a proposal for 3 years, and the increase for the cost of the audit coming up that they would be doing for this year that we're finishing in June was $23,000. Their charge this past audit was $21,200. So they did say they would do the 2018 audit for $23,000, and also included, if we wanted to do 2 more years, what that cost would be. I basically asked them if they would, if we said, well, we just want to do the 2018 audit, and then I have an option to renew for those following 2 years if those same prices would apply, and they said they would. So basically what we're proposing is the scope of services will just be revised slightly to say that either party, the auditors or us, could determine after the 2018 audit to not renew it for the following 2 years, or if we're satisfied at that point, we could continue on with the 2 following years and have a 3-year agreement at the prices they had quoted there. I was a little bit surprised about the increase from what we paid this year to next year, but again, we're just finishing a 3-year contract with them. They may have underestimated the amount of effort on Shelburne's audit, given all the things we have going on. So that was about an 8% increase from what we paid this last year. But I noted in the following 2 years is only a 3% increase. So they're kind of enticing us, I think, to try to go with a 3-year, although we're not obligated to.
Yep.
So the request, I think I'll probably just have them rework the document so that it's clear at the end that we do have the option of either the auditors or us have the option of terminating it after the upcoming year or continuing it as they proposed here.
Aren't there gap rules for best practices for how often you should switch your auditors?
I don't think there's specific guidelines, but obviously it's good practice too. In the past, we've gone, I think, longer than 6 years with one audit firm. I don't think I would have a problem renewing with Sullivan Powers for 3 more. That would be 6 years total. We would certainly want to be bidding after that. I think basically the quality of the firm speaks for itself. They've got a large client base. They're well respected. I think we get a good product from them. So I think I would be comfortable going with 3 years, but understand the 1 year continuation we'd be doing at this point.
And the idea is to just not lock in the new town manager? Is that why only a year?
I think so. Just to have a clean slate in terms of, them getting a handle on how the audit was conducted and whether that's something they're comfortable with or if they want to go out to bid for it.
I'm comfortable with that.
I'm good with it. You feel good with the number, Peter? Even though it's a little increase, you think it reflects
Yeah, I think we
market
could
more or
probably
less?
find someone that would do it less expensively, but I'm not sure you would get the quality. And with everything we've got going on right now with grants and everything,
Yeah,
you want a
there's-
good quality firm that's going to be looking at everything and making sure it's in
Right.
order.
Continuity is worth something here.
And to
Don,
bring-
any comment?
No, I really agree with everything that Peter has said. I was very impressed with their work, and I think the arrangement that he suggests makes perfect sense for where we are at right now.
Any comment remaining?
Yep.
Yep.
I move to extend a 1-year contract with Sullivan and Powers for the 2018-2019 audit.
With optional 2 years?
Okay, with
As-
optional
as
2 years
presented.
at the presented prices in the contract.
And a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jamie.
Just one clarification, it's actually the 2017-18 audit that
Sorry.
they would be doing, that year that ends June 30th, so.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion? Any discussion in the public? If not, will those who approve signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. It's unanimous. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
The next item is to consider appointing town representatives to the Pierson Library Building Steering Committee and the CCRPC Board. I'm going to suggest that we take up John's potential appointment first, and then just ask Kathy for another 5 minutes. I know you've been so patient. Lee, you want to?
Well, the two sitting representatives, John is here and George is not able to be here, but they both indicated their willingness to continue serving. It's a 2-year appointment. And so it would be through June 30, 2020.
Okay.
So if the board is satisfied with their representation, then probably no reason not to reappoint them.
I certainly am. Move to appoint John Sarconi and George Safone to a 2-year term to the CCRPC board, starting tonight and ending June 30th, 2020.
Second.
Seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, will those who approve signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, John. Thank you, George, in absentia.
John, thank you.
Never met Mary, so I just,
Nice to meet
a
you.
little old school, I wanted to show up just to put my face before people I'm serving that may not know who I am.
Apologies for making you sit here for so long. We're doing our best, as Jerry said.
Yeah.
This is all second nature to me. My
Yeah.
entire career has revolved around things like this, so.
Thank you
No
for your
problems at
service.
all. Although I will say that of the dozens and dozens of select boards I've ever dealt with in my career, most of them meet at 5 or 6 o'clock to start. I've never understood why we meet at 7. Just food for thought. Just food for thought. I got to believe it's at your discretion to determine when your meetings begin.
Yeah, it's an interesting suggestion. In my experience, it doesn't shorten the meetings. It just makes everyone much hungrier.
Just gives you more time until
But just to,
Maybe it works.
whatever. But thank you all.
Thanks, John, for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the other item is to appoint a town representative to the Pierson Library Building Steering Committee. Kathy, you want to introduce the?
Well, sure. Hi, I'm Kathy Townsend. I'm the chair of the new library and town center steering committee, and I know the board is thinking about appointing another member, and I'm just here to answer any questions, provide information, if you have anything.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if there seems to be, I know that Colleen is on the committee, and I know that we talked about possibly having a town employee staff the committee. I certainly couldn't meet the heavy meeting load of this committee, especially now that it's heading into construction. And I'm just wondering if it would be too taxing to ask someone from the committee to report to the select board every other meeting during the course of construction, if that would be something that would be helpful to the board and achieve the same purpose of having a representative from this body go to the meetings.
Well, to be honest, like that's what's been going on for the last few months since the bond passed was me staying in touch with Joe Colangelo, and then with the ability to be able to report back as necessary. But per conversation with Jerry, this was more about the fact that the town manager was a voting member of the committee, and there was concerns about Lee's ability to be able to do that. And Kathy had voiced some concerns about having a quorum now that Joe's not, or, then since Lee isn't able to have a vote. And so, Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but the thought was if both of us were on the committee, then one of us would be able to be at most of the meetings and therefore be able to help with not only achieving a quorum, but also having a representative of the town who has a vote be present.
Yeah, this has been occasioned, as Kathy knows, by the fact that the interim town manager.
Yes, I understand.
Okay, that leaves, yet on the other hand, the interim town manager is approving expenditures. And we have sort of a funny arrangement in which the interim town manager is a spectator, maybe called public participant.
Could I make a point to that?
Yeah.
Lee is here,
Yeah.
and he assists the select board
Yeah.
in the same manner as he helps
But
us
the
at our
difficulty,
meetings.
but the difficulty we have, Kathy, is that we have as a board, made a commitment as a function of a contract to a certain status that we're, in my view, going to stick with. And we have a 3-month period here before a full new town manager arrives, who presumably will be joining that committee, and thankfully so, I'm sure. During which I think it's would be very useful to have representation of the town manager's office and select board in the person of one person who can share the burden of time that the meetings take. I'm in a funny position. I don't mean to advocate for myself, and the fact that I've got time shouldn't be the only qualification of mine. But I do think it's important that the board has a routine representation at these meetings, in doing so, can assist the function of the interim town manager in approving expenditures for a limited period of time until we have a new manager on board. And that's been I realize it's an awkward, funny kind of Rube Goldberg way of doing things, but it's the situation we're in. You've been very understanding. I'm sure the steering committee has been too, which is greatly appreciated. My colleagues can make up their own minds. One of us declined. Lee has checked with staff, whose burden is such that they can't feel they can manage it in any responsible way. That doesn't surprise me. We have a major staff member who's fully involved in the search committee, and their plates are kind of full. The other staff member has been here tonight on for 3 different things. So that has us arriving at this point, and at this point, I'll seek direction from the board.
If you're willing to serve, that's fine with me.
I certainly cannot, and do you attend the meetings but don't vote?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought. I'm glad that that's what we're doing. I agree.
Informed,
yeah, no, I'm happy that that's what you're doing.
It's been super valuable.
He participates in the best way we can.
So it's
we
just
could
a
manage.
non-voting capacity, right?
Yeah,
That's how we structured the.
It's a lot like this. It's
Yeah.
Lee is a part of
Right.
the, discussion.
Yeah.
So the thinking is to add a select board liaison to
Just so
supplement
that,
the.
so that
Temporarily.
he isn't perceived to be for all de facto a member of a kind that we agreed as a condition of contract he would not be.
I would welcome a select board member.
Yeah.
I have a hard time accepting another town employee when we have 3 town employees
Yeah.
involved in the meetings every single week. And I just think it would be a waste of taxpayer expense
Right. Yeah.
to have another town employee.
God bless.
So I would welcome a
They're
select
too
board member.
burdened. I mean,
Yeah.
we can't go that way, so.
Well,
Yeah.
the chair is supportive of your addition, Mr. Chair. I think we're all supportive of.
So,
Yeah.
for the duration of the time in which we have an interim town manager.
Yeah.
Okay, so move to appoint Jerry Story to the Shelburne Library and Town Center Steering Committee for a term starting tonight through the conclusion of hiring a new town manager.
Second.
And I'll put the question. All those who approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those disapproving, nay. And of course, I will abstain, so.
Great.
You
I
have a new
think
member.
that gets us off on a good footing, and we'll certainly be very eager to help in every way possible.
We'll see you Friday.
Yeah.
Friday at 10.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kathy,
Thanks.
for your patience.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah,
I saw you
thank
reading
you.
your book back there, which
Thank
is
you.
appropriate.
Thank you, everybody.
Books to read.
I didn't ask for public comment on that, but
When do they meet?
they meet Friday routinely in the morning
Oh.
and some days in the afternoon, same day.
Friday
Right.
at 10 o'clock for the steering committee. And our minutes are all online and our meetings are all open to the public, so we welcome anybody to attend.
Thanks again, Kathy.
Thank you.
The next item is to consider adopting the 2018 Local Emergency Operations Plan, LEOP.
So moved.
I have one, I looked at this, and I had one edit.
Did not.
I did, because I was interested in the schools, and I saw that on page, there are no page numbers, 4, Alan Miller's still on the SCS line. It should be Scott Sebo. That's it. Just make sure we have the right contacts in there, that's all.
That's the contact for SCX.
I don't think that's like a substantial change. I think your initial motion stands.
Yes, your motion stands. It was more corrective and, yeah, corrective comment.
Yep, ready for a vote.
As corrected, we have a second. Is there any discussion among members, any discussion in the public? Hearing none, those who approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Josh, I didn't ask you if you had a comment, sorry.
No,
And those disapproving say nay. The ayes have it. The next item is, we will make several motions regarding the executive session.
Move to find that premature public knowledge of labor contract negotiations with members of AFSCME would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
Second, is there any further discussion? Josh?
No.
Those who approve signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye, and those disapproving nay.
Move to go into executive session under the provisions of 1 VSA 313-1B to discuss labor agreements with employees represented by AFSCME and invite the interim town manager to attend.
Second.
Moved by Colleen, seconded by Jamie. Any discussion on the board? Any public discussion? Hearing none. Those who approve signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those disapproving nay. It's unanimous.
Okay.
Jerry,
I don't expect that we would come back for,
I don't know.
I'm not gonna
with a decision of any kind. I anticipate we'll come back to adjourn.
So we can sign off?
I would think that would be a
Yes.
pretty good bet.
Fine with me.
I think so.
Yeah.
No other business that we're at.
Yeah.